Yes, here they are. Okay. We don't need the actual percentages, we just need what they do. Okay, so we'll just we'll start with the warrior stuff real quick. Is it the only MMO I play right now? Yes, yes. So we'll start with the warrior stuff real quick, guys. And you know what we'll do, actually? We'll open up the HFC. There we go. Just have this here as needed. Okay. So we'll just work our way up. We'll just touch briefly on these. So the warrior class trinket is right here. Mechanically, shield block reduces your magic taken, and shield barrier increases your armor by X%, depending on the difficulty of the trinket. So this is a bit of a deceiving trinket. It's really good, but people are jizzing themselves over it immediately when the thing is, it's actually quite specific to certain situations. Basically, if there's no magic damage for the fight, whether it be consistent magic damage like a dot on the tank or any kind of spike damage, it's really not that useful, because most of the time your barrier, although it interacts pretty well with 4-piece, your barrier is going to get chewed through pretty quickly. It's not actually usually going to last a 6-second duration, and you know, you're probably going to be expecting like 250k barriers without trinket procs and stuff like that at higher gear levels in HFC, so it's going to get chewed through usually pretty quick, as it does now in BRF. So the trinket is actually not that useful, right? If there's no magic damage, the shield block component out the window. If your barrier gets chewed through quickly, the armor boost is really not that useful in the grand scheme of things. However, as soon as you start to ramp any form of significant magic damage up in the fight, this trinket is going to be a really big deal. So it'll be one of those trinkets that you have to kind of swap in and out on a per fight basis, if that makes sense, all right? For the paladin one, and this is one of the ones I wanted to kind of sneak on and check before doing this, but unfortunately it's still down. The what's it called? The PTR. So there's a couple problems with the paladin one. One is that in the prior testing that I did, it did not re-trigger. Sorry, it did not re-proc. The fuck? It did not re-proc once below the threshold of whatever percentage it was based on the difficulty value of the trinket. So if it was, let's say, 80% with a 12-second ICD, and it would proc when you dip below 80%, if your health was never raised back above 80%, then that hard light hands bullshit. If it was never raised back above 80%, then it would never go off again. Like, you could just hover between 0 and 80% for the rest of time. The trinket would not reproc. So that was kind of shit in itself, because sometimes that would be the case, and then you'd be wasting potential proc time. And also, the heal itself did not scale at all with resolve, which is really shitty too. They might have changed some of these. I didn't get to test it. If they didn't, though, the trinket itself is honestly not that great. Maybe useful in constant AoE situations where you can guarantee it'll proc, but anytime you're off tanking and stuff too, it's also completely useless. As is the warrior one, just as a note. Okay. Cats, please. Why the fuck are you in that box, man? Cats. For the monk one, it's... Oh my god, shut up. Dude, he like got himself stuck in a box and now he can't get out of the fucking box. What do you want me to do about it? I'm not going over there to get you out of the box. Alright, well, whatever. I'm leaving him in there. For the Brewmaster one, it's okay. The thing is, there's so many other competitive trinkets that justifying take up a slot for a situation where you proc a free stack of elusive brew, and again, it worked on the same mechanics as the Paladin one. Once you have procced it below passing the certain health threshold, it did not reproc on an ICD or anything like that. So you have to go above and below the threshold constantly to keep reprocking elusive brew. And the problem is, because of the 4-piece snapshotting or snapshotting guards a lot on top of you, your health will remain very unchanged a lot of the time, so it doesn't allow this trinket to proc very often. Now, the secondary effect of it, just the damage boost, it's just a damage boost, right? So if you need a bit of extra damage for whatever, to meet the DPS check, whatever it may be, you're trying to scumbag, blah blah blah, then the trinket's fine for that, though it probably won't be as depending on if you're running a crit build, the damage boost might not be as significant as using like an actual bonus armor, like mastery proc trinket or whatever it may be. It just depends on what kind of EB uptime you have, but it could help in DPS situations. And obviously, the secondary portion of this will help with off-tanking, right? Because you'll stop the damage while off-tanking. But the problem is you're usually not going to be popping Elusive Brew while off-tanking, because that's just stupid. You need to have your charges for when you actually tank, right? So it's a bit misleading as well. So far, the trinkets are like, not, I don't know. To me, they weren't very good. The Guardian one is, when we did testing with it, it was kind of shit. Yeah, that's just what it is. It's 10. The Paladin trinket at the mythic level, if it procs on ICD, is basically 10k DPS for a Paladin, single target, right? 120k divided by 12, so seconds that is. Anyways, the Guardian one, when we tested it, was very much, imagine like DK 4-piece, DK tier 17 4-piece, but that applies to all forms of magic damage. So when we were testing on Mythic and 715 eye level gear, max resolve, all that kind of stuff, this trinket was reducing anywhere in the neighborhood of 11 to 13k damage, which sounds good and bad, right? It depends on the situation. So if you have, much like you would with the DK 4-piece, if you have tons and tons of stuff hitting you for smaller amounts of damage, dots, multiple adds, which exist a lot in this tier. Only truly one of the 13 bosses is like pure single target damage fight. All that kind of stuff. Then this trinket becomes decent. Is it better than some of the other trinkets? Depending on the kind of build you go, probably not. There's one thing to note about this trinket as well. It has a Thorns effect associated with it, so you reflect a lot of the damage back onto the attacker, into the neighborhood of, it'll boost your damage by an extra 10%. Every time I would look at my Skada after doing pulls with this trinket, it would be an extra about 10% damage. So, again, do you want to help a bit more with damage? This would be a good trinket. However, is this trinket useful in any way when you're actively off-tanking? No, not at all. Nothing's proccing, nothing's triggering it, unless you have a dot taking on you or something like that. Alright? When do you expect? I don't know, Gogeta, man. Maybe within a few days, I would assume. And then the last one, guys, the DK one is probably the best of the trinkets, relatively speaking, like relative to the other trinkets. I'm not saying it is the best trinket for DK and you should always use it. Relative to the other 4 tank class trinkets, this one's probably the best because of what it does. It works when you're on and off tanking, it increases your damage, and it increases your survivability through self-healing. So it's just solid. It's good to have. Now, again, God, you're fucking annoying, cat. Now, it'll depend, again, a lot on the different types of fights that exist, right? If you don't need this little intermittent, incremental self-healing on various fights because you're getting chunked, which you probably will in early Mythic, then 18% of a Death Coil, which you're not spamming at all times, really not that great, right? This trinket is also kind of their attempt before actually nerfing BOS to kind of make you not use BOS, and then they nerf BOS anyways. So it's good. It's like, I would say the monk, all the trinkets are like good to have for when you might need them, but the ones where like you'll actually need them, and again, I'm talking about like, I don't mean just generally. When I say like you'll need them, I'm talking directly about this tier, about the bosses, about the kind of damage that exists on the bosses and stuff like that. The ones that you'll really probably get some use out of on some bosses are the DK one, definitely the Warrior one, and like maybe the Guardian one. Can you use all of the trinkets whenever you want all the time and see some benefit? Yeah. Are those trinkets ideal at all times? No, they're not. I'm just telling you 100%, they're not. So that's kind of like a quick breakdown of the trinkets. Overall, there's just better, more reliable, solid options, even if it's the boring version of trinkets. One of them might be the Tech Dis equivalent trinket for Kormrok, which is really good. The usual Stam Versatility Bonus Armor. That's an amazing trinket. Boring, but it's really effective. It's effective when you're tanking. It's effective when you're off tanking. So is the one from Iskar. That's Bonus Armor Mastery Proc, beefed up version of BFD. Whatever it may be. There's just more reliable, predictable trinkets. But because these set of trinkets right here, all these class trinkets, I don't know why I'm pointing at my monitor, you can't see where I'm fucking pointing, because of all the wacky behavior of some of these trinkets, such as the Thorns effect of the Guardian one, which most people don't even know, or, you know, whatever it may be. I'm sure there's going to be cropping up some situations where some trinket interacts weird with some boss or ability or mechanic or whatever and is like OP all of a sudden. So just because of the nature of the trinkets, I think it's always a good idea to have these in your back pocket, even if you don't intend using them like for the majority of progression, whatever it may be. But as just your standard trinket, assuming there's nothing funky about its behavior interacting with certain mechanic, they're not going to be cookie cutter for a lot of classes. They're just not, straight up. All right. And again, guys, I'll preface all this with saying that, like, these are all my opinions, right? It's fine. You can disagree with them. You can agree with them. It's totally up to you. But all my opinions are backed by hard evidence and testing of every single boss on PTR, of every single difficulty they released, swapping trinkets in and out on a per-pull basis. So my opinion is backed with some form of, you know, like actual testing associated with it. Now, whether you've found something or disagree or whatever, that's fine. It's totally up to you, right? Everybody's of different opinions. This is just what we've seen be effective or ineffective. That's all. So let's talk real quick about the tier bonuses, and then we'll jump into the actual bosses. Where the fuck are they? They should be down here as well, I think. I don't know if these are up to date though, because this is a later post. I might have to find their newer post. Hellfire. No, okay, these are the old ass ones. Tier 18 set bonuses. Hotfix. Can't wait to accidentally click on a porn site and get banned forever. I don't know if this one's up to date either. I don't know what the fuck this site is, so. Oh my god. Oh, this is actually really up to date. Okay, cool. Okay, so we'll just start backwards again with the warrior one. What about Drake's opinion? So we'll start with the warrior one real quick, guys. So really quick and dirty. Your 2-piece reduces your last stand by 50%, the CD on it. So it goes from a 3-minute CD to 1.5-minute CD. And your 4-piece increases your shield barrier's use during last stand while it's active by 100%. It was 200%, everyone knows, or maybe you don't know, it just recently got nerfed, down to 100%. First and foremost, is the nerf a big deal? Not really. It's a nerf, yes. Is it a big deal? No. And that's because of one of the main reasons stems from the duration of barrier itself. Popping a 750k-ish barrier with a 6-second duration will often see you end up in situations where the timer will actually expire before the barrier is even consumed, is a lot of the time what we were seeing. So a lot of the value was lost anyways. So that 100% nerf is not really that big of a deal, because most of the time it wasn't even getting chewed through that much anyways. And because barrier is spammable, unlike guard, it does not have a CD, right? It's the warrior's version of your self-heal resource spender. It's very easy, especially with higher gear levels and depending on the kind of build you go, to pull enough rage to back and then even generate enough rage during those 2 barriers to generate a 3rd barrier during your last stand. And they'll just be SOO style, almost, not really, but SOO style indestructible for a bit, right? You're just going to be constantly absorbing what ends up to be millions of damage within a 15-second window, all right? So, are they worth getting? I think so. I really do. The only problem with 4-piece is that, problem or not, actually, is that it kind of pushes you even further to use Ardent Defender, to use Anger Management. Why? Because Anger Management reduces your cooldowns on basically all of your abilities every time you spend rage. So the more rage you spend, the more cooldown goes down on last stand. The more last stand active you have, the more of this beefed up barrier you can get from 4-piece, right? Makes sense. However, of course, there are some fights, and also in general, Anger Management is just the best scaling talent of the tier. In fact, it's really the only one. Ravager only scales with damage. The Gladiator's Resolve doesn't scale at all. It's just flat percentage. AM scales with everything, though. It scales with haste, scales with crit. It's just the best. Okay, not everything, but it's the best scaling one. Bitman, man, thank you so much for your continued sub and support, by the way. 2 months and going strong. Very much appreciated. All right. So it kind of pigeonholes you into an anger management build, but the thing is, there are certainly some fights where it's like, not that dangerous, not that dangerous, danger, 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 right? And if with or without anger management, those danger periods you'll still have last stand up for, then just on that particular fight, anger management defensively is probably not so good, because it's not going to make you use your last stand more, for instance. You'll still use it at that period, and it's not going to make you be able to use 2 last stands within that period, so sometimes it's not as good as you'd think, but offensively it could still help because it reduces avatar, blah, 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 blah. So, is it worth getting? Yes. Is it like absolutely groundbreaking that you get it? No, but you should get it, IMO, for sure. And just like I mentioned earlier, there is good interaction between 4-piece and the trinket, because what is one of the things that we said was the problem with the trinket? The problem was that barrier often by itself gets chewed through pretty quickly. If you have a barrier that's double the value, and during that time is spammable, you can, in an extreme situation, equate having last stand with having X% increased armor, because you're going to have barrier up for longer periods of time, and during those barrier up times, if you're using the class trinket, you'll have that armor boost as well, right? Okay, so we'll go over to let's talk about the Warlock 4-piece. JK, who the fuck cares? The Shaman. Is this a Dutch
surprise,
cockpit? German site? Okay, where are we at? Priest, Paladin. Let's talk Paladin. Galanox, man, thank you so much for your continued sub and support as well. 4 months and going strong. Very much appreciated. Okay, so Paladin. Paladin 2-piece, like, just in summation, Paladin 2-piece, good, decent, get it. 4-piece is Garbo. And I'm going to just say it right now, guys. Some of these may have changed since last time I tested them a week and a half ago, right? Because they're doing, like, everything they've reported, I assume, which is only the 4-piece nerf for warriors. So I'm like 99% positive they have not changed any of these mechanically, because they're well beyond the point where they're allowed to change things mechanically before a live release candidate. So if anything, we'll see numbers adjusted, and the only adjustment that I know of, class trinkets and tier bonuses, were the warrior 4-piece, and we already talked about that. So let's just assume everything is fully up to date, but you never know what they're going to do last minute, right? Who knows? Anyways, 4-piece, unfortunately, it sounds really great. Your Avenger's Shield is 50% chance to have its cooldown instantly reset when used. Sounds great. We're going to be spamming Avenger's Shield. It's actually quite shit. There's a couple reasons behind this. One, the Paladin rotation is already so jam-packed with other abilities, and your ability queue will always favor holy power generators before any other ability, that you will have to push this back anyway. So it feels bad. You can't really take full advantage of it, and it does not, which some people thought, it's not an actual Grand Crusader proc. So if I throw my Avenger's Shield out and the 4-piece procs, it's not a Grand Crusader proc. It just resets my Avenger's Shield. So the next Avenger's Shield will just be a regular Avenger's Shield, and that's great, and it does some damage, and it works with 2-piece because it gives me the 1.5% absorb, but it's not that great because, hey, I'm losing holy power. Like, my Crusader Strike and my Judgment's up, but my Avenger's Shield proc, I really want to use Avenger's Shield because it's such a cool talent in 4-piece and stuff, but I'd be an idiot not to take a third of an SOTR in the meantime, right? So that's the biggest problem with it. What they should have done is just made it straight up a Grand Crusader proc, decrease the 50% proc chance to something more reasonable, like 20%, whatever, and end of story. Unfortunately, it just blows. The only reason 2-piece is pretty solid is because they changed it from a hot to an absorb, and it scales with resolve, which is quite good. So it's basically like, imagine like a mini version of another Sacred Shield on you, right? So obviously the interaction they were going for is like, well, every time you cast Avenger's Shield, you get this decent absorb, and you could just spam, if you're lucky, you just spam Avenger's Shield and you get all these absorbs. But I don't want those absorbs, which are not that big, so they get wrecked pretty quickly, rather than just getting my fucking usual rotation and putting SOTR up, alright? So that's the issue there. So, should you get 4-piece? I mean, ultimately, Is it good? It's not really that good. Ultimately, is it advantageous? Assuming like you can balance your haste and stuff properly, yeah, because you will cast more Avenger Shield, but it's not nearly as good as it looks just like reading it at a first glance. So I would totally, like during progression, get your 2-piece, and then don't even worry about 4-piece until it's just something that's about to get DE'd or something like that. It's not going to help big time with progression at all, alright? Let's move up here. Monk stuff. Everybody knows, right? There's no doubt here. Monk of the tank bonuses, Monk 4-piece is the strongest. You need it, like you really need it. Monks got nerfed. They're a bit more plush with lower gear when entering starter mythic, and this 4-piece helps a lot. So what's the 2-piece for starters? Expel Harm has no cooldown when you're below 50% now instead of the 35%, and 4-piece every time you Expel Harm reduces your guard cooldown by 5 seconds. So, obviously that's great, and it's amazing, but you got to keep something in mind, okay? The community is very much of the theory crafty opinion that you're going to end up in a situation where you're in some like magical world where you have guard up 100% of the time, and you luckily snapshot it at 49.5%, and your guard never falls off, and all you do is Expel Harm and guard constantly. It's not going to happen, man. I'm telling you right now. That's not the reality of what's going to happen. Dax, thank you for your continued sub and support. 3 months and going strong. Now, is it really good? Yes, your uptime on guard will increase significantly, etc., etc. But your guard's going to get chewed through faster because you're going to be getting hit significantly harder because you have 20% less stagger. You're not actually going to be in a magical ward where you're constantly spamming Expel Harm and refreshing your guard. Blah, 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 blah. But it will, to be like this, when guilds are planning their gear allocations for mythic or whatever, or hey, are your 2 and 4 set P's good? Like, get them. You have to get these, like ASAP for sure. So get 2-piece, get 4-piece right away. It will vastly increase their survivability on monks next tier, especially relative to what the community is used to now, where monks are just like frankly indestructible, right? So so get them. Use them ASAP, even to the extent that, like, if the only way for you to get 4-piece is to use 2 pieces of heroic and 2 pieces of normal, do it. It's that big of a deal. It's a really big deal. Okay. Okay, let's move up here. I think DK's next. No, Druid. Okay, Druid. Okay, Druid is kind of in the same situation as Paladins are. Their 2-piece is really good with a little star beside it. The problem with 2-piece is that Blizzard was like, hey man, nobody's using Guardian of Falloon because Guardian of Falloon sucks dick, so let's buff Guardian of Falloon, right? Let's give you a 10% base dodge chance increase and blah 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 blah. And then they give you a 2-piece and a 4-piece that are completely reliant on Savage Defense uptime. So me, as, you know, your typical World of Warcraft player, which only has half a brain. I'm just kidding. Me, as your typical World of Warcraft player, I go, well, why would I want to take a level 100 ability that decreases my active mitigation uptime and therefore lowers the value of my 2 and 4-piece? It doesn't make any sense to me at all. Not to mention that there's pretty much no major abilities in this tier coming up that you can cheese with 100% dodge. Guardian of Falloon. You know, if there's some bosses, and there were some in early PTR testing, where you could like dodge this really big dangerous ability, it was kind of like, alright, you know, maybe I'll use it for this boss kind of thing. They kind of took it out, just like they did in SO with Malkorok's, or what the fuck his name was. It was Malkorok, right? I was thinking Maloriak for some reason. Malkorok's, like, you know, debuff application on the tanks in early PTR iterations on 5.4, those were dodgeable. So it's like, fuck, man, bears are the best ever. And then they changed it, which they always do. They always do the same thing. They always make it dodgeable, and then they're like, wait, that would be too OP. Anyways, so bottom line is, GoE, if GoE already was a pretty shit choice, it's like the ultimate shit choice now. Like, you're not going to use GoE this tier at all. Anyways, 2-piece is good because obviously what it does is it increases all healing done to you by 20%. For absorbs as well, at least in our testing, so healing and absorbs increased by 20% while Savage Defense is active. That's great, especially bears have a larger health pool, so that increased healing intake will help top them off easier, blah, 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 blah. 4-piece, the problem with 4-piece is, okay, their design goal for 4-piece was that while your Savage Defense is active and you're also taking... They basically want bears to have crazy self-healing. And bear self-healing is pretty good, right? Their Frenzied Regen has a pretty high coefficient. So they said, well, hey man, we want you, while you have Savage Defense, to be able to heal yourself even harder, so you're getting healed for 20% more because of your own buff from 2-piece, and it's only costing you half the value, so spam some Frenzied Regen. So the problem is, realistically, in raiding, even at higher gear levels, unless you're going like some like haste or crit build or something, which people won't, you don't actually, like sometimes, it's really stupid with bears because when you're off tanking, you literally cannot dump rage fast enough because you don't have a rage dump outside of spamming Frenzied Regen, which you're not going to do when you're off tanking because it doesn't fucking do anything, right? When you're actively tanking though, between maintaining a proper 50% uptime on Savage Defense and using your TNC procs, and trying to maul for dear life to get some fucking damage on the boss, and any kind of cleave you can on 12 out of 13 fights that do have some kind of cleave or multi-target element associated with them, you don't actually have the rage to be throwing around willy-nilly, even at half cost for Frenzied Regen to spam heal yourself a lot of the time. So this is kind of like the Paladin 4-piece. It's that its intended design is good, and will it be beneficial in the long run? Will you actually get some use out of it in situations where you will have a larger rage dump and you don't need to apply your TNC procs a lot of the time, and you get better gear and more rage generation? Will you use it sometimes? Yeah, for sure, 100%. Are you literally going to use 2 Frenzied Regens per Savage Defense and still somehow have 60 rage left over to get your next Savage Defense up? No. Not even 1, probably, especially early tier. So it has good intention, but realistically, in the raids that we were seeing, you didn't actually get that much use out of it. That's the problem. All right. So again, should you take it? Yeah. Would you? Is it something you should emergency rush, get ASAP like you would for Monk? I would not recommend it personally. And last one's DK. The DK ones that, from what I've seen and talked with people, and from what I've tested and seen and had other people in Midwinter test and see, it's a very split feeling for some people. Some people don't really care for it because it's just more passive healing, essentially, right? And they don't really need it, and they'd rather min-max their stats better, min-max their eye-level gear better in some other areas, because tier and mythic's only 725, and you can get 730 and 735 if you're lucky to have the pieces of Archimonde and whatever, right? However, some people very much like it because the amount of self-healing throughput is a big deal, and we all know the DK how DKs are literally built in this game, how they're constructed, how they are with lower gear, how they are with higher gear, how they are against dangerous throughput encounters, how they are against spike damage, blah 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 blah. So this one, my man Crush Monday is streaming. Oh, what's up, Chief? So this one is this one's a tough call. You could be in either boat that we just mentioned. You could be in the I think this is really good camp, or I think this is not so good camp. Personally, I would take it. It's a lot of healing in the throughput of a fight. The thing is, a lot of the people have the mentality that they live in a very they imagine things in a very instantaneous, like singular situation where this one time it's like, you know, it'll be like, well, fucking Archimonde hits me for like 300k damage, like this self-heal won't help that help. But you gotta broaden your thought process to across tens and hundreds of pulls, especially if you're doing, the sooner you're doing Mythic, the more apparent this will be. Across hundreds and hundreds of pulls, across 13 bosses, even the smallest little boosts will help with throughput when you don't even actively notice them. That extra bit of healing throughput from the DK could really have helped on some fights. Conversely, could the eye level have helped more? Who knows, right? This is why it's like, oh, why are you going Night? Why is Night Elf the best tank? It's just 2% dodge. 2% dodge over hundreds of pulls is a really big deal when you're trying to min-max, all right? It sounds like you don't have a slight buff Death Strike via SOB stacks. You would. Well, it's just it's a throughput thing. Their self-healing will be... the thing is, in its first iteration, this was like guaranteed, and this was 50%. And that was just way too much. Like, it was way too powerful for self-healing. So then they nerfed it to... Or was it 50%? Anyways, they nerfed the numbers down to 25 and 80, because it was just too much. So... I think, in my opinion at least, based on the gear I peeped over, I think there's definitely a good... they actually made you have a pretty decent, compelling choice between, do I want 4-piece, or do I want potentially higher eye-level gear off-pieces, right? Now, if you build your personal best-in-slot list, and you find that your off-pieces are only eye level 725 and your main pieces are 725 too, but maybe your off pieces are a bit better itemized, I would definitely take the tier pieces. It's only when we're talking about eye level differential with secondary stat boost versus just the tier pieces. That's where it's kind of like eh. The usual stuff, I think this one will depend a lot on the fights too, guys. It'll is there a consistent damage input fight where you're constantly getting like pillaged for dots and damage, and it's not just big chunk damage hits from the boss and stuff? I'd probably lean more towards 4-piece at that point. Is it not? Is it like a Black Hand style thing? Is it like a Black Hand style thing where he's just crushing you every 1.5 seconds and there's nothing else to it really? Maybe not as much. It also depends on not the quality of your healers, or maybe the attentiveness of your healers to tanks, are they totally fine healing you without that extra self-healing boost from you? Great. Or is it vice versa, that because you have that extra self-healing boost on you, the healers can focus in other areas? Great too. It's a very depends ... situation with these. Holy shit, Kale, man. 15 months, baby girl. Thank you so much, man, for your continued sub and support. Let me push that butt. All right, guys. Anything we talk about, we'll do some Q&A at the end, so just make a mental note of it. I'm like peeping over at chat in the meantime. I see some people asking questions. I just want to get through this, then we'll have a little Q&A at the end of it, okay? So that's kind of like a very brief versus content, which is the important point here. That's what we're trying to cover. Versus the new content, brief overview of the Tier 18 tank sets and their class trinkets, and whether or not they'll be actually good versus a lot of these encounters or not. We'll have that in the bag for now. So let's talk about the bosses a bit. We're going to talk about these obviously from a heroic standpoint. We can theorize a bit into the mythic stuff. I can't really talk about mythic though, but we'll do what we can. This is more of what to expect for people that have not been able to PTR test at all, not been able to watch any of the VODs. What can we expect on these kinds of fights? What kind of abilities do these bosses have? And as a result, you can start to formulate your own thoughts about, well, this tank would be really good for countering this one not so good, blah, 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 blah. Valeria, 6 months. Thank you as well. Just that bum. Continued support. Very much appreciated. No, I'm just doing tank stuff. LeWolf, that's tanking's my world, man. Okay, and also this isn't gonna. I'm not even gonna touch the whole like throughput. We're just going to assume most of these bosses hit very hard on, especially mythic and stuff like that. So the whole like which tank has the best throughput and smoothing and stuff, we've already talked about ad nauseum in this channel over the past month while we're in PTR and stuff. So let's just leave that aside. We'll just focus on the bosses, if you can call Hellfire Assault a boss, and what they do and what to watch out for. I'm not going to go in depth analysis on every fight from every angle, just more so the tanking stuff, okay? What's up, Graph buddy? Okay, so for Hellfire Assault itself, this fight is Gallicrass without Gallicrass. Let's put it that way. It is a waves of adds fight with a couple of mini bosses here and there. Well, on mythic mini bosses at the start. For every encounter, there's the main half boss, which basically fucks off at 50%, and she ends up mounting Iron Reaver, which is the second boss of the encounter. Don't need to worry about that right now. And then goes away. She has a couple of abilities. You just need a tanker. Nothing really you need to worry about with her abilities. Her only ability that's pretty dangerous is relevant to throwing an axe around the raid. Nothing tanks need to worry about. Just move out of her shockwave. Tanker. Bring her over to any other adds that are landing while she's still getting chipped down towards 50%, and cleaver. That's all you got to worry about there. I'm just going to check if PTR's up in the meantime, because it's either go with the DJ then on here. Yeah, that's true. There's tanks. Well, hang on, Decima. There were tanks in fucking Galacrest too. Okay, PTR's not up yet. Okay. Okay. As far as tanking in this fight is concerned, the only actual shit you need to be worried about are the following things. Well, getting aggro on things. Getting aggro on these casters while potentially ignoring them. But this is more of a DPS thing, having discipline to not fucking touch these things after you've, I don't know, hit them once with like a shield slam or something. The only dangerous part of this fight are these. Alright, hulking berserkers. You have to be careful with these. It doesn't seem like a big deal, and they're not that big of a deal at the start, but because of this debuff right here, this ramps up very quickly, and it hurts very badly, and it goes up to 9 stacks and will rip your anus apart, okay? So, it is a responsibility that these need to obviously die fast enough to make sure that you don't get stacked too much, but you will have stacks on you, and once you get to the higher amount of stacks, you're going to be getting crushed, because it's not an effect that only makes you take increased damage from future slams. It's all physical damage. So you have engineers on you, you have the little shit-ass dragoons on you, you perhaps still have the boss on you, you have a berserker on you. All this is getting increased physical damage taken by 30% per stack. Okay? So, these need to die. A tip to know here is that what we saw is that their slam ability was a melee range kind of thing, okay? So if you're reaching high levels of stacks on slam, and you're a mobile tank, or you have a priest nearby or something, the duration is only 12 seconds. So if you can kite this ad around successfully and get the fuck away from it, you can technically drop your stacks. Obviously, that's not the ideal solution, because then what's going to happen is, if you're running around like an idiot, all the melee are going to be running around like an idiot, and then they're going to yell at the tank, and then the tank's going to be like, look, man, you guys aren't killing it fast enough, and they're going to be like, well, we're not killing it fast enough because you're running around, and then Abbott and Costello's shit's going to go on, and everyone's going to shoot Jerry Curl all over each other, okay? So, that's the only thing you really need to worry about as a tank. Outside of that, just your usual tanking duties. Bring ads to other ads so you can cleave them, group ads together, silence ads if you're a paladin or whatever. DK grips is obviously going to be very useful in this fight because there's tons of ads everywhere, blah 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 blah. These main ads on Mythic, again, not anything to be too worried about. Groot himself is basically just a mini boss version of these hulking berserkers, alright? And the siege vehicles are not to be tanked. They're just DPS'd. So nothing to worry about for tanking there. Okay, guys? So, as I said, this boss here, Siege Master Martak, at 50%, fucks off, goes in her Iron Reaver, and then this makes up the second boss encounter in Hellfire Citadel. Pretty cool looking boss. There are definitely a few things tanks need to worry about here. Especially in Phase 1. Phase 2, not as much because she's not tanked, but we'll get to that in a second. Let me just peek over at chat in the meantime, then we'll keep going. That's some good warm Sprite. Okay, so for her Phase 1, this boss works in 2 phases. She has an energy bar that she fills, and at 100% energy, she takes off and starts her Phase 2. That phase is on a timer. Once it's done, she lands back, okay? So for the first phase, she is tanked on the ground, and there's really, technically, like a direct tank ability. There's only one ability you really have to worry about in this phase, and it's called Artillery. What happens is, she debuffs her current tank target with a 12-second debuff, and after 12 seconds, she fires a missile, as you can see, 450k fire damage at that target, and it does damage decreasing the further away you are from it. So, if If your tanks are Space Cadets and sit in the raid with 12-second debuff, they will kill the raid immediately. So the idea, of course, is other tank debuff happens on the main tank. Main tank gets the fuck out of the raid for your more yards, explodes on the side, comes back in. Happy days. Okay, that's the idea behind it. So obviously some tanks with mobility, and this is probably one of the higher tank mobility requirement bosses, will have an easier time here. Okay. So, obviously, warriors are going to be amazing. Monks will be very good. Druids will be pretty decent. Paladins will be okay because they'll be able to sprint. And DKs will have their little fat legs waddling with Death's Advance. That's pretty much all they can do. Now, can you get away from a boss within 12 seconds, even as a DK with only their 30% sprint over 6 seconds? Yes, but you need to do it right away. The problem arises later that you cannot always do it right away because sometimes artilleries overlap. So one tank will get debuffed, they need to get the fuck out of the raid, and when they're getting the fuck out of the raid, the next tank gets debuffed. So you cannot get taunted off of, like if there's two tanks, the other tank can't taunt off of you because they're sitting on the side of the raid waiting for their shit to explode before getting back in. So what can you do about this? The fuck was that? Oh, it was this. We're going to have random ads playing. I know we are. I'm going to close that. So, what can we do about it? Well, there's a couple options. Warlock portals for one, but that's a 90-second cooldown. Or this is a tank you could just fight. You could just 3-tank. All right, have the third tank fill in any assignment for when both tanks are debuffed simultaneously. Easy peasy. Okay. So that is what you can do to combat lower mobility tanks if you're running, like, I don't know, double DK on this fight or something like that. Oh god. Anything else in this fight is relative to the entire raid. Don't sit in fire. You're not going to get vengeance anymore. Dodge the massive frontal barrage cone. It's going to be a pain in the ass as a tank, because what she does is, if she's stationed here, she charges up her barrage DBZ style, so she's like, and goes back like 20 yards, and you're sitting there as the tank, like, and then melee are like, why is the boss moving? And then you're like, I'm not moving the boss, and then they're like, yeah, you are. And then they're yelling at the back of your head, and then you're like, why don't you say that to my face? And then they say they're yelling at the back of your head, and then you say you're lying because now you're facing them, and it's just a stupid argument, right? So the problem is it's really frustrating to keep positioning her because she constantly jolts around with her shit, so just be prepared for that. Very big a pain in the ass. The other thing you have to worry about is Blitz. Everybody in the raid needs to worry about this. She'll charge like 40 yards in a random direction, and then charge back near where she started charging from, okay? In the second phase, she's up in the air, so she's not tanked anymore, okay? So in the second phase, what's going to happen is she's going to be like shitting on the ground with the oil, lighting the oil on fire. There's going to be bombs that you need to DPS. As a tank here, your only concern, and everybody's concern at this point, artillery can now target more than one person, 3 people, depending on your raid size, and all 3 people need to get 40 yards away from anyone else to make sure that they don't do much damage. In the meantime, as a tank, all you do in this phase is you just help deal with bombs and blow bombs up, okay? So, not terribly difficult of a tank fight. It's going to be all about timing to make sure that you can properly run artillery out and get back in time before the next tank's artillery goes off so that you can taunt. Now, this is all, of course, based on PTR testing. Whether they change some timers to make it easier on some difficulties, who knows? But you can, any of these fights, of course, you always have a 3 or 4 or whatever tank option. You're not locked into having 2 tanks at all times, right? So if you don't have any massive DPS constraints on a particular fight, and things are made vastly mechanically more simple by 3 tanking, always consider 3 tanking, right? I know everybody's EP is extra large as a tank, but sometimes it's just easier to 3 tank, okay? Okay, so the next boss, once you enter the Citadel, you have, once the second boss is done, you actually enter the Citadel, and you have, I believe, one of 3 options. You can either go to Kormrok, which is on the right as you enter, or your right would be this way. You can either go to Kormrok, you can either go to Hellfire High Council, or you can go to Gorefiend. And once you kill High Council, you can also go to Kilrogg. So that's kind of the stops being linear for a bit thing here. So let's just assume we go to Kormrok. Kormrok is mechanically, he's the next he's the next like rock giant bro, right? It seems to be like a trend going on right now, right? We had Tectis, then we had Kormrok, now we have Kormrok. Anyways, so in this fight, the entire idea in this fight is that Kormrok has 3 different color pools. Whenever he selects a pool, he will have a different set of abilities in that pool. Okay. Based on his pool, he will also have a different ability that he does on the tank. So we're gonna just review each pool real quick and understand what the abilities do and how dangerous they are for the tank and how dangerous they are potentially for the raid too, and then the rest would be up to you. So he has, if you just walk into the room at first and look at him, you will have on the left the orange pool, in the back the green pool, and on the right the purple pool. All right, so if we go to the yellow pool first, let's say he selects the yellow pool first, what's going to happen is he, in this phase, as long as he's empowered by the yellow pool, he will periodically root his active tank and cause them after 10 seconds to explode for a massive amount of AoE damage to anyone within 40 yards. So you can't do, so this is kind of similar to Margok's root in phase 2, if you guys remember that, for Mark of Chaos, but there's a couple of things that make it a bit more of a pain in the ass, okay? You can't, most shit doesn't work in it. You can't blink, you can't human trinket it, you can't bubble it, all that kind of stuff does not work. At least didn't work. Who knows what they changed? Always try new stuff. Most importantly, it does not have a cast time associated with it. So on Margok, he would cast Mark of Chaos. It's a 1.5 second cast. You still had time to react to it and go, oh shit, he's doing it. Warrior leaps out. Paladin charges for a bit while he's casting it. Life grip, whatever it may be. This one is just done. The moment he decides to use this CD, you're immediately rooted, okay? So keep that in mind for your raid's positioning, how you guys are going to work with that, how you're going to react with that. There is no cast time associated with it, all right? Keep also in mind that the explosion does damage to you as well, not just the people around you. So if you're sitting at 10% health and you're going through Play Dude magazine starring Trekkie for the month, and your health is at 10%, you're going to die, okay? So just keep in mind that for healers and for tanks themselves too. If you need to pot or something, it does damage you too. If he selects the green pool, in this phase, what he does to the tank is he summons a Kormrok style hand that will come up from the ground and grab his current tank target and basically hit them for increasing physical damage the longer the hand grabs the tank. Okay? So, obviously, they need to be broken out. And the other tank needs to taunt in the meantime. Because Kormrok, it's not an aggro drop. So once you get grabbed in the hand, he's still meleeing you. The way it turns you, usually you get your back turned to the boss right away. And the hand is ticking for damage on you, okay? So, so people just need to kill this hand immediately. And then that's it. Not much to do here as a tank. You just get grabbed. Keep in mind, you can still do stuff while you're in the hand, okay? You can still attack it. You can still pop your active mitigation if you have the resources. You can generate and spend resources while you're in it. You can do your rotation on it, okay? So, the last one, the purple pool, guys. In this one, it is a very hilarious and stupid ability where basically Kormrok, like, Falcon kicks you across the room. And when I say across the room, I mean he punts you like 100 yards across the room. So what happens in this one is, where is it? SWAT, here we go. It has about a 1 second cast associated with it, and it will, like, he has a massive room. He can probably throw you corner to corner across it. He also stuns you for about a second when he does it, or maybe a second and a half. This is to prevent chargebacks, right? So warriors and monks and all that kind of crap, they can't charge back. However, monks could still technically nimble brew. Actually, I don't know if nimble brew worked. Do you remember, Graph? Are you still there? Anyways, you could technically, assuming it's a regular stun, you could do nimble brew, human trinket it, whatever, get out of the stun and transcend back in time. Back in time to land, not back in time like to the dinosaur age, I mean. Okay. So what's going to happen is you're going to get punted, the other tank's going to need a taunt. It doesn't sound so bad, right? Because you're like, oh, well, he just fucking punts you and you face him to a wall, duh, tanking 101. The biggest problem is, okay, nimble worked, okay. The biggest problem with this ability is that it usually comes at a time when the empowered ability of this pool is occurring, and what happens, when this pool's ability is occurring, and what happens is that there's the globules from the splash pool come out, and there's little oozes everywhere, and oftentimes you'll get punted into one of those oozes. There's only so many safe areas along the wall where there's no pool. The pool does a lot of damage too, so you have to get punted into the correct areas, and those areas are often filled with crap and all that kind of stuff. So that's the big problem with it. The other problem with it is that even if you manage to get out of your stun or have a priest grip you, and by the way, when he punts you, it's not like a blackhand punt where it's like smashes you and then you like nice and slowly go in like, you know, an arc. It's like he hits you and it's like you just like zoom across the screen. So priests have to basically sit there holding their nuts if they're going to grip you. And the biggest problem is that the other part of the ability associated with, sorry, English, my brain is melting. The other shitty part of the ability that prevents you from trying any kind of trick to return back to the boss immediately is that you take damage inversely proportional to how far you travel. Okay? So if the boss punts you this way and you like leap or charge back in right away before actually impacting the ground, you're going to take max damage right here and maybe die or whatever it may be, right? Now, you can probably mass CD it when you're coming back in. There's obviously going to be some kind of fine line between distance traveled to damage taken where you can safely come back down, maybe 10, maybe 20 yards out, whatever. So just keep that in mind, though. If you're finding ways to cheese it, expect that you're going to be nuked pretty hard if you land back at the boss's feet, whatever you may do, okay? Yes, exactly. It's like kick to the face, but it's like mega kick to the face. The last note about all of these tank abilities is that every time one of them happens to you, regardless which one it is, it's going to put this debuff on you called Fell Touch. And as you can see, it increases your magic damage taken by 50% on a pretty lengthy timer, I forget. Not too short, but not too long either. So what that means is that in any of these situations, especially the SWAT, he'll SWAT you, put the debuff on you. So then what we just talked about, landing in the pool, landing in the oozes, whatever, you're going to take also 50% more damage from that. Or if you come back into the boss quickly, you're going to be taking the 250k damage plus an extra 50%. Or if for some reason you soaked 2 roots in a row in the orange pool, you're going to be taking 50% from the explosion. So you're going to need to watch out for that. No, Trekkie, it's not Mythic only. Unless they turn it into Mythic only, but I'm pretty sure it's not. Otherwise, there would be absolutely no incentive to ever swap tanks or bring 2 tanks to this, right? If there was no debuff associated, you could tank it every single time, just CD. Once you're in the hand, you just CD, no penalty. Once you're in the root, melee just move away for a second, no penalty. For the punt, you get gripped, whatever, right? So, or somebody can just, you know, die by the dick or something for a bit of time, right? Yes, guys, I will. This will be saved as a VOD. That's why there's no music playing, and it'll be put on YouTube too. Anyways, so that's really all you have to worry about as far as tanking is concerned. Aside the usual duties, position the boss properly, blah 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 blah. That goes without saying on every boss. Those are the things you kind of have to look out for as a tank in this fight. Yeah. So let's move to the next one. So we'll just assume we'll go to High Council, right? Keep in mind these 4 fights. Keep in mind, guys, there's an increasing eye-level loot system in Hellfire, which we all know about. It's basically split into 4 chunks. There's 13 bosses in here, so you have 3 chunks of 4 bosses, and then Archimonde himself that drop increasing eye-level gear. So the first chunk that drops the lowest eye-level gear is Assault, Reaver, Kormrok, and Council, which we'll talk about in a second. Then the next tier up is Kilrogg, Gorefiend, Iskar, and Socrethar. And then the final step up before Archimonde is Fel Lord, Zul-Herak, Velhari, and Mannoroth. And then Archimonde himself drops 5 eye level above those. All right. So the last one in the lowest tier is Hellfire Council. This is a council fight. I know. Let's all calm down here for a sec. With 3 ads associated with it, 3 bosses, very much like Iron Maidens. One of them kind of basically tickles your nuts in terms of damage and doesn't really do much to you, and that's Blade Master Jub. The other one is Dia, and then the last one is our good friend Gurtog from BT, Burning Crusade days, for whoever played back then. Of these bosses, you cannot tank anyone near Dia, okay? Dia has an aura around her that any of her bros within 25 yards will become immune to all damage, period. Okay, so Dia obviously cannot be stacked with the other bosses, otherwise those bosses are immune. So you have to tank the other bosses. Severick, man, thank you so much for your continued support. 4 months and going strong. So you have to tank the other two bosses, Gurtog and Jub, either together somewhere else or separated somewhere else, however you want to do it. Dia cannot be stacked on them. So let's focus on one at a time here. For Jub himself, there's honestly not really much to say. He doesn't do anything crazy or too dangerous to the tank. Pretty standard melee stuff. Most of his stuff is mechanical raid stuff. Dodge this, kill these, whatever, you know, nothing really crazy to worry about as a tank. Even his 30% ability is not really very effective on the tank outside of a small burst hit that the entire raid receives. So the two, which is otherwise, if he did significant tank stuff, you'd need 3 tanks for this fight likely, especially at lower gear levels. It's the same reason that, for instance, Iron Maidens like Marak doesn't really do anything. Sorry, not Marak. Garan doesn't really do anything, right? You have aggro on her, but she just sits there shooting people. Otherwise, you'd need 3 tanks on that fight. Okay. So Dia is one of the ones that you actually do need to tank. Needs to be tanked by herself, as we talked about, and she actually has depending how they tune it. Everything's depending how they tune it. She has actually kind of a decent-ish, like, scary tank ability. It's called Nightmare Visage. She basically turns into like a ghost aberration thing and just like fucks you up for a bit. So that is what you should prepare to save your, depending on your gear level and all that kind of stuff, your either overlapping CDs on top of active mitigation or just to your active mitigation if you're working on a charge system, right? If you have your shield blocks, you make sure you have at least 1 shield block ready to go for which it transforms in Nightmare Visage. If you don't have shield blocks available, use your wall, use your demo shout depending on your eye level. This is a good time to call for an external, blah, 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 blah. This is her burst tank damage. Otherwise, it's just standard melee damage, which obviously on Mythic will be a decent amount of damage, but this is the scary part of what she does as far as tanking is concerned. Gurtog himself melees fairly hard. Melee's fairly hard as well. However, he stacks a bleed on the tank, which lasts for 29 seconds or 30 seconds. It's called Acidic Wound. It will stack basically indefinitely, and it decreases your armor as well. So, it starts to hurt a lot after a while, and you need to find a way to reset the stack. One is obviously tank swap, which you have to be careful for, because unless you're a warrior that casts vigilance, or unless you're a DK with 2 taunts, when you if the Dia tank that's like fuck it, I'm not gonna draw it. If the Dia tank that's on one end of the room taunts Gurtog and the Gurtog tank taunts Dia, that's great. They'll swap. They'll be immune for just a second, but the guy that's still tanking Jub will have Jub for another 8 seconds, meaning it's not ideal because Jub will be sitting there for 8 to 10 seconds being immune to damage, which would suck, okay? So that's that. So you can swap whatever you may figure out. You need to drop your stacks eventually because they will kill you. Like, no matter how good your gear is or what class you're running or how good your healers are, you'll just be getting hit too hard, and at that point Jub's not so dangerous melees will become quite dangerous, as will Gurtog, as will the Nature Dot, all that kind of stuff, okay? So that's what you have to watch out for Gurtog. Positioning and mobility in this fight, actually this entire tier, outside of like Archimonde Mythic, who knows, right? Or Archimonde himself too. This entire tier will not have as much of a mobility necessity across tanks as other tiers have had, like in Highmaul, for instance.
Surprise, cockbags!
Not that there's not things you can DOO, man. Thank you so much for your continued sub and support, dude. 4 months and going strong. Very much appreciated. Not that you can't... not that mobility in some situations is a nice little boost, but there's not a lot of situations where it's like, wow, if we had like a fucking warrior, this fight would be like 75% easier, okay? So, this, like that, is one of those fights.
Surprise, cockbangs!
The boss is, there's not a huge mobility aspect to this fight outside of dodging the ghost that Dia spawns, so obviously you don't want to get hit by those, and maybe moving a bit for some other mechanics. That's really it. There's no like cross running around the room, unless you have some like crazy strat that does that, go for it, but there's not really a huge necessity to do that on this boss. Nerdsman, thank you as well for the continued sub and support. Just that bum, 6 months and going strong. Thank you, thank you. Hop and Bop do not remove... Well, Hop definitely does not... Bop does not remove the bleed as it's a nature-associated bleed. Bubble did not, when I tested, remove the bleed either from Gurtog. Again, who knows what they've changed, but we'll see. Just, look, you guys do whatever you want, alright? You don't need to tell me what the strats are for this boss. I mean, we've practiced, and we know our strats a lot. I'm just saying stuff to look out for, stuff that you need to be worried about as a tank, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so those are the 4 bosses in the lower tier eye level rating. And also some people have been asking what bosses is Midwinter doing first, blah, blah, blah. I can't really tell you, I'm sorry. But some of it is quite obvious and you could potentially formulate on your own, right? If you're in the branching wing after Iron Reaver, what would make more logical sense? Right, assuming proper tuning. Should we go to one of the 2 bosses that still offers the lower eye level reward gear, meaning they're probably tuned a bit lower, or should we just go head first into one of the higher eye level bosses? That's up to you ultimately, but you know, most guilds will probably stick to the lower eye level bosses, go for the lower eye level, get the extra gear, then go tackle the harder bosses. But every guild's different, right? Okay, so let's talk. So after a council dies, you have a choice between the 2 remaining bosses on the main floor, Gorefiend or Kilrogg. They both drop the middle tier of eye level stuff. Also, as a note, by the way, Kormrok, who drops tier gear? Kormrok, Gorefiend, Socrethar, Zul-Herak, and Mannoroth, I believe. Those are the 5 that drop tier gear. So Kormrok is definitely a consideration because he drops the lower eye level gear, but he drops tier. Tier is higher eye level. Tier is standard eye level across all pieces. Anyways, so you either go Gorefiend, Kilrogg next. Let's just say we go Kilrogg. This fight, from a tanking perspective, has 2 elements. The boss himself, obviously, and there's a big ad that spawns, which, surprise, surprise, is something that you get to preview during the trash. Because boss abilities during trash up to the boss being previewed is a new and cool thing that Blizzard's doing and has never done before. So you get to see these ads a bit how they work. They are very dangerous. They hit fairly hard. And this entire fight is based around your... it's an MC fight. If you get too much corruption in this fight, you reach 100 corruption, you get MC'd. You're fucked, okay? So you need to manage corruption levels in this fight, and of course the big ad has a lot of different ways you can put corruption on his main target, the tank, or people around him too. Kilrogg himself melees fairly decently from what we saw. Again, I actually know for a decent fact that most of the bosses in Mythic testing as far as normal melee damage output were actually undertuned, so you can expect them all to do fairly higher damage, especially on Mythic mode when it hits live servers. It's because they didn't want people to spend time getting crushed in the face and learning how to heal tanks during a precious 60 to 90 minute testing session. They just wanted people to test mechanics, right? That's what they're doing. Much like why Archimonde Heroic was fairly undertuned and people easily reached the end of the fight. Okay? So anyways, so on this fight, Kilrogg, we'll get to the big ad in a second. On this fight, Kilrogg himself, the only thing you really have to worry about as far as Kilrogg goes, well, there's a couple of things. One is his positioning and the direction he's facing is very important. Keep that in mind. Again, depending on your strat and your positioning, it might not be important, it may be important, but there are some things that are important, such as the fact that his visions of death are spawned in front of him, so based on where people are in the room and stuff, you might want to point him in a certain direction so that people can make sure they get to the circles in time, okay? His tank ability that you have to watch out for is this, Shred Armor. Basically, if you don't have active mitigation up, he will apply this to you, forcing a tank swap. This tooltip is wrong. In the past 2 testings we've had, it doesn't actually make you take more damage from the next shred armor. It just makes you take straight up more damage, period. You take 40% more damage, or depending on the difficulty. You just take more damage, period. So his melees turn into quite dangerous melees. So if you do get this debuffed by accident, you're going to have make a tank swap. And then you're going to be in trouble because oftentimes there will be a big ad up. So you're going to be having to tank either the boss or the big ad with this debuff application on you. So oops. So just be careful. Always, if you are a charge-based tank in terms of active mitigation, so you have block and SD, for instance, make sure you're holding one in your back pocket if you know that shred armor is coming up. All right. If you're any other kind of tank, always, and this is just tanking 101 kind of shit, always have some resource pooled, right? If you're a paladin, have always at least 2 to 3 holy power pooled. Ideally, you should always have 3. If you're a monk, well, monk will always have it up. But I think for this purpose, just like they did on Claxi back in SOO, EB is what's going to be considered your active mitigation here. So always have some EB stacks pooled up for this kind of stuff. For a DK, make sure you have some runes pooled up. I don't know if they're going to make rune tap considered your AM on this or blood shield. I'm like 98% sure it's going to be blood shield again. I don't know when they're ever going to move away from that. They really should. But the cast itself on shred armor is fairly forgiving. And you have a decent amount of reaction time to scramble and pool resources and grab some resources if you can, if you didn't pool them. However, you should pool them, okay? Okay, so that is what you need to worry about from Kilrogg's perspective on tanking. Now, for the big ad on this fight, you need to worry about a couple of things. First of all, his positioning is very important. He has a frontal cone that hurts, and that gives you corruption. And obviously, since it's a frontal, anybody in that frontal will get hit too. So don't move him around a lot. Once he's positioned, make sure everybody knows the direction he's facing in, etc., etc. Where's the ad? Let me scroll down here a bit. This is the ad, by the way, the Hulking Terror. Okay. The longer the ad lives, the more dangerous he is to you and the raid as well, for 2 reasons. Well, for multiple reasons. 2 main reasons. One is Fell Claws. Just his normal melee attacks have innately a chance to further apply corruption to you. So eventually you will get MC'd as the tank. And 2 is his Rending Howl cast, which is basically a physical dot if it goes off, which needs to be interrupted. Every time it's interrupted, it casts faster and faster. The longer the ad lives, the harder and harder it will be to interrupt. You're going to start failing to interrupt it. He casts it more frequently than the debuff duration, meaning it can stack, so it needs to die quickly, okay? At the end of the ad's death, he will explode and give a bunch of damage and corruption to people around. So at the end of the ad's life, you should be moving it out of the raid, make sure that no one is within 10, I believe it's 10 yards. Yeah, no one should be within about 10 yards of the ad when it explodes, okay? So just keep that in mind as a tank. Here is one of those situations where, for instance, is mobility useful here? Yeah. Is it necessary? No. It would be nice to heroic leap with the ad at 5%, leave it in an extra few percent so the melee can DPS it, and then be able to leap out and get out of there quickly, or roll or transcendence out and then monk taunt it for the increased speed, whatever it may be, right? Just min-maxing stuff, but it's not a huge deal at the end of the day. So there's other things you have to worry about. One last note that I didn't mention, on this fight, if Kilrogg technically should not have to move too much in this fight. However, when he spawns bloods through Heartseeker, and those bloods are like people fail to kill them for whatever reason, like your ultimate number one, like you have to do this, like bloods cannot reach Kilrogg, period. If they do, you will either wipe, either by virtue of the immense raid damage that it hits for, or the fact that he will heal. Okay? So if there's a blood coming and it's like coming for Kilrogg, you gotta move Kilrogg like right away, and fuck anything else that happens at that point. If he's about to do Visions of Death, too bad. People will have to adjust and pop a sprint or a roar or something, right? They cannot hit bloods. That's about it. Keep in mind, he is immobile for his death throws, which he casts very frequently. Okay, so if there's a blood coming and there's a death throws coming and people aren't killing the blood and they're like, "Yo, tank, move the boss," and you're like, "I can't because he's fucking casting death throws," you guys are fucked. All right, so just keep that in mind. So that's all there is to say for this boss. It's very much, technically speaking, there's no tank swap necessary at all as far as Kilrogg is concerned, because if you avoid his shred armor, you avoid his shred armor, that's great. However, because of the nature of the way the big ad applies corruption to the second tank, you cannot keep tanking back-to-back ads unless you cleanse off your corruption through the other mechanics in the fight. So if you don't do that successfully at the start, you will have to tank swap by virtue of the tank on Kilrogg has room for corruption. The tank that just tanked the big ad does not have room for corruption. Right? Is the first tier to the garrison shipyard free? I have no idea, man. Is it? Okay, sure. I haven't touched that stuff at all. I'll have to read up on it tonight. Rune tap, Death Strike, and Blood Shield. Well, Death Strike, like Blood Shield from Death Strike, I mean, yeah. I'm surprised they made Rune Tap work. Anyways, whatever. If it works, it works. Great, cool. Alright, so that's it for Kilrogg, guys. Not much else to say here. Let's move over to Gorefiend. In my opinion, unfortunately, not a very exciting tank fight. Very cool fight, but kind of boring for a tank. Not really much to do. He's a big, stationary blob, much like Kormrok. Does not move. You only have to worry about one other big ad in this fight. Otherwise, that's about it. There are other things you can do on this fight as a tank, but that will entirely depend on your strat, and it's not a right or wrong thing to do necessarily. Okay. So on this fight, Gorefiend himself melees fairly decently. Again, just again the disclaimer: whatever melee damage you saw on the PTR was likely undertuned. Just FYI, so you will get hit relatively harder as a tank on here. There is no, as far as Gorefiend himself is concerned, the only forced tank swap mechanic is when he kills one of the tanks by default using Shadow of Death, which forces you to go into his stomach and then the other tank taunts. Okay, once you are sent into the stomach as a tank, you have well, technically three things you can do in there. Your first and main goal while downstairs, these are the trap souls, this is what you'll see in the stomach, is you need to pick up the enraged spirit right away. This only spawns when the tank is sent downstairs. You need to pick it up. It does annoying shit, right? It hurts you, it has bellowing shout, which needs to be interrupted because, as you can see, it will crush you otherwise. He puts a void zone on the floor with a cast. While he's casting the smashed void zone, you should already be moving out because it ticks the second it goes down with a pretty nasty dot. So you could be pre-moving for that, and you should be pre-moving for that. Slam just punts you around a bit, blah, blah, blah. Once the big ad gets to 70%, it takes damage reduced by 90% and gets out of the stomach by itself. You no longer tank it. While you're still down there, you have two choices at this point, okay? What happens is once an ad is killed downstairs in the stomach, it goes back upstairs to the remaining people in the main realm, in the main platform. In its basically equivalent version from the stomach, is just called something else. So you have two choices. One is you either go back up right away, because this new big ad upstairs also needs to be tanked, or you stay downstairs and you can help kill some of the small ads, or off-heal if you're a paladin, you can LOH, whatever, or off-heal some of these smaller ads in the stomach. But if you do that, that means the one tank upstairs needs to tank Gorefiend, which hits relatively hard, and this ad. When this ad goes upstairs, it also starts to stack a fire dot on you, okay? So it just depends on if the other tank can handle the damage for a bit while you try to help downstairs, because it's more beneficial to be able to kill the, aside for the big ad, the neutral ads in the stomach and heal the neutral ads in the stomach, rather than have them come upstairs with higher health when they're actually a danger to the raid, whether it be fixate or AoE damage, whatever it may be. Anyways, once you've made your decision and once you're back upstairs, the big ad that you've killed downstairs is now upstairs with its remaining health and will stack a fire dot on you. So very simple tank swap mechanic, right? Once one tank takes too much, one tank should be on Gorefiend, one should be on the big ad. Once the one with the big ad has too many stacks, you just swap. Big ad taunts Gorefiend, Gorefiend taunts big ad. They could be tanked together on top of each other, whatever it may be. And the two tanks, or melee nearby, or ranged as an emergency, need to work in tandem to make sure that you're interrupting Bellowing Shout, which is cast more frequently than you have an interrupt CD for. So it's cast more frequently than 15 seconds, right? So so just make sure you're interrupting that, otherwise you'll get your shit pushed in. All right. What's up, Bottom buddy? Dude, man, I'm not Towley. Yes, and if you're lucky, Gorefiend will taunt the big ad too. Okay, guys, so that's it for the main floor, the first 6 ads. Once this is done, you get teleported to the Shadow Nexus. You once again have a choice up here of which bosses you want to tackle next, so there's a bit of option. You can either go to Iskar, you can either go to Socrethar, or I believe you can go to any of these 2 bosses. I don't know actually if you can go to Fellord until you kill Zul-Herak. Either way, you have 3 ways you can go. The same choice applies here. Iskar and Socrethar will be at the same eye level reward as Kilrogg and Gorefiend, which you've just successfully killed, obviously, because we're all superstars. Or you can try to tackle the higher eye level bosses, Fellord and Zul-Herak. Alright? Up to you. Do what you want. Let's just assume we stick to the lower eye level stuff and have a natural progression. We'll go to Iskar first. Yeah, so we'll go to Iskar. Get the black lung pop. So what's going to happen here is, as a tank in this fight, again, fairly low mobility fight, mostly, especially for a tank. The boss damage, this of most of the bosses was one of the lower boss damage melees. I assume it'll be ramped up a bit. We'll see. Phase 1 of this boss, pretty tank and spank. You just sit there. He will cast Fel Chakram on 3 targets. One of them will always be the tank. As soon as you're targeted with it, you'll have a crosshair above your head. Move out to wherever you need to move out, because people will take decreased damage based on the further they are from the impact of the Chakram. Then you just move back in. And once you move out, the other tank taunts, of course. Once we are in the transition phases, this is where the fight gets a bit hairier for, well, the entire raid, and for tanking too. Iskar is going to fly off the platform and fuck off, and a bunch of ads are going to spawn, which need to be tanked. A bunch of little ads for the first and second transition, and an increasing number and type of big ad will spawn. So he will transition 3 times in the fight. In the first time, he'll have only the Corrupted Priest. The second one, and little ads, which are these illusionary outcasts. In the second one, he'll have outcast, priests, and a warden. And in his third one, he'll have outcast, priest, warden, and... he will not have little ads in the last one. But he will have priest, warden, and Felraven. All 3 big ads in the third transition. Alright? None of these ads really melee very hard per se. Here it's all about making sure you've picked them up, and making sure the main thing you have to worry about is the Felraven when its debuff is active on its current tank target. That tank needs to get the eye thrown to them in order to cleanse the debuff. The longer this debuff is channeled on the tank, the more it pulses for every second, and it pulses AoE on everyone around them, so melee are getting shit on, right? So they just need to be dispelled, and then be prepared to throw the eye to whoever else may need it at that point. Those are really the only specific tank-related duties. Iskar eventually lands back on the platform after a bit, and you just resume the fight. It's a very cool fight, and a lot of it comes with the new unique Eye of Anzu thing that's going down. And as a tank, you could be somewhat involved, not involved at all, really involved, depending on your strat, whatever it may be. By default, sometimes you'll be involved in the first phase when he does wins, and you might be targeted with wins as a tank, so you have to get the eye thrown to you, throw it to someone else, etc., etc. But as far as tanking goes, a lot of it is honestly pretty tank and spank. You just sit there and you tank, you move out a bit for Chakram, pick up the ads, get the eye if you're on the Felraven. One note on the Felraven, guys. It's really important that you guys know who's tanking it, right? You're going to have 2 tanks. Get one tank dedicated to tank the Felraven. That way, the raid, whoever may have the eye, will know that this is the tank on the Raven. This is who I have to watch out for to get the debuff, and this is who I have to throw the eye to when it's time. If the tanks are constantly struggling for aggro, and one tank pulls aggro off of the dude that's supposed to have the Felraven right before the debuff goes out, you know, people can usually react fast enough, I would hope, but it still causes a bit of confusion, and you might get an extra pulse or two that could be pretty lethal on some difficulties, depending on your gear level, right? No, the eye, guys, the eye mechanic on this fight is a one thing. It's just one thing that you pick up, and whoever holds it can throw it to whoever else using the special, using the extra action button one, alright? So, make sure you have your shit bound, because there's always that one dude in the raid, man. Always that one guy. It's always like, okay, guys, everybody have your special action bound. Everyone's like, okay, got it. And it's like, Trekkie, throw it. Trekkie, and Trekkie's like... And then Trekkie has left the raid, and Trekkie has left the guild. Fucking Trekkie. Anyways, so make sure you guys bind it, otherwise you are going to wipe. Because somebody's not going to be able to throw it, and somebody's going to get thrown off because it wins or whatever it may be. Sure, it's like a beach ball. Why not? Anyways. Okay. So, the last boss in this tier of eye level loot, which is the middle tier, I guess we can call it, is Socrethar. This is definitely a fun tank fight, because half of the fucking fight, well, it's fun for one tank. Crap's like fuck. So this is a two-phase fight, which you constantly switch back and forth between the two phases, depending on what the health balancing is going to be. So what's going to happen is, at the very beginning of the fight, you're going to be in phase 1, which is fighting this soul-bound construct. Down to here, you don't have to worry about that. That's mythic stuff only. Or maybe you do have to worry about it, but I'm not going to talk about it. So you have to worry about this soul-bound construct, which has a handful of various abilities that you'll need to deal with. As a tank, this is what you will have to mainly worry about here. Reverberating blows. It is a like 1.5 second cast or something like that, where he'll smash the ground in front of him, and anyone caught in the cone will have will split the applications of Shattered Defense right here. So the way this ability works is basically it has 3 charges to distribute to its targets that it catches in the cone. Okay, if one target eats it, it will get all 3 stacks. What these stacks do is they make you take, as you can see here, increased damage from future reverberating blows. You can also choose to get 2 rogues with Feign or whatever in the cone. Therefore, you'll have 1, and 1 stack, and the tank won't be as close to dying next time. Maybe you can soak another reverberating blow, whatever it may be, however you decide to split it. That's what the ability does. You should be splitting it with people to make sure that you can take 2 to 3 instances of blows. With 2 tanks, it's 2, because it's a 45-second debuff. It's usually done every 17 to 18 seconds, so you need to be able to take 1, then another, and then the next tank taunts for 2, and then you taunt for 2 because your debuff will be gone, and so on and so on. So rotate every 2 applications of blows, and to mitigate the amount of tank damage, because it hits extremely hard, especially when you have stacks, you'll need to split it, divvy it up amongst other people in the raid, right? Outside of this phase, outside of the tank only stuff in this phase, that's the only stuff in this phase that is tank only that you really have to worry about. The rest of the stuff is everything else that every other person has to deal with. Stay out of prisons, dodge orb, obviously boss positioning should always go without saying for tanking, get out of fire, blah 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 blah. Once the construct dies or reaches 1 health, what's going to happen is you're going to enter phase 2. Socrethar's ghost, for whoever did the storyline in Shadow Moon, is going to come out. He's going to act all badass with his Fu Manchu. I don't think he actually has one. And he's going to then become a tankable unit. 1 tank at this point will jump into the construct, and the other tank will tank Socrethar. In this phase, you're also going to get 3 portals that spawn around the room. 1 portal will spawn little ghost ads. 1 portal will spawn basically a caster Sargerai ad, or Draenei ad dude, and the 3rd portal is going to spawn a melee tank like Draenei ad. All right, they're all on different timers, etc., etc. So in this phase, the main goal is whoever is manning the construct can now use the construct's abilities that you saw in Phase 1 that he was using on you. You now use those abilities to kill Socrethar and keep the ads under control. The main 4 abilities on Heroic that you have in the first, that you saw in the first phase, you will also have in the Construct in the second phase. So you'll be able to put down a prison, you will be able to charge and put fire on the ground, you will be able to do the Arcane Orb Nuke, and you also will be able to do the Reverberating Blows Frontal Cone. So you have to use all those abilities to tackle the various ads and then kill the boss. And that's it. The boss himself, when left unchecked, will chain cast... where the fuck is he? Will chain cast Exert Dominance here, okay? Every time he casts it, as you can see, he will take 5% off of the Construct's health. If you die in the Construct, he will then go back in the Construct. Construct will go back to full health, and then you repeat Phase 1 again, right? So that's the constant push and pull between the 2 phases. So that's really it. That's all for the tanking. It's very fun being in the Construct. You have to read and learn your abilities and formulate your own strats and crap like that. As far as the tank downstairs that is not in the Construct is concerned, Socrethar himself melees for standard shit, actually not even that hard. The ads that spawn don't really melee very hard either, so there's nothing too concerning downstairs, quite frankly, outside of positioning the boss correctly, moving it to different portals if you're going to do it that way, whatever it may need to be, and making sure you're one of the people contributing to interrupting Socrethar's Exert Dominance, right? So, that's really it for this fight. It's actually a lot of fun for a tank, but it's also a very short fight. Every instance we and various other guilds in the world, I think including yours, right, Trekkie? Like Nihilum 2, basically it was either too bugged and you would have killed it, or came extremely close to killing it. So I would assume that they'll buff the numbers maybe a bit or something, or make it a bit less forgiving if you do fuck it up, but like it was a very short-lived fight, usually. Right. Okay, so now we're entering the final tier before Archimonde of bosses, which drop the highest eye level loot aside from Archimonde himself. Once you've killed Socrethar, you have, I assume, again, I think you can go to Zul-Herak or Fellord at the beginning. Either way, you'll have access to Fellord, Zul-Herak, or Velhari, up to you where you want to go first. Mannoroth is not accessible until you kill these 3. And then Archimonde's not accessible to you kill Mannoroth, obviously. No more high mall bullshit. So, since Socrethar is in the same wing as Velhari, let's just assume we're going to Velhari after this. Velhari hurts tanks a lot, okay? I'm just going to tell you right now, guys. Velhari is very painful for tanks. It's not only because of her big melee hits, but it's her big melee hits in combination with her tank debuff and in combination with the fight mechanics, especially Phase 2 mechanics. So just a very general overview of the fight. She has 3 phases. In each phase, she has a different aura that affects the raid somehow active, and once you push her to the next phase, unless you're on Mythic, that aura disappears, she applies a new aura. In the first phase, it's an aura that punishes you over time. The more you move, the more damage you take. In the second phase, it's an aura that, as time passes, your maximum HP is lower and lower and lower. So you can see where that's going with big tank melees. And in the third phase, it's an aura that, as time passes, will increase your damage done, but also increase your damage taken. All right. So these mechanics, plus the dot she stacks on, plus the debuff she stacks on tanks, which makes you take 10% less healing and absorb per stack, plus the fact that she melees quite hard and she's one of the later bosses, so she's meant to fucking melee really hard and have high numbers and stuff. This will be a nasty tank survivability fight. Nothing too complex on this fight. It's honestly strikes me as a very one of your typical like butcher style fight where it's like pretty unforgiving numbers. Mechanically, nothing's too crazy about it, but it's just like crazy on all fronts. That's what this fight kind of strikes me as. We'll see. There's obviously some mechanics you have to deal with, which you guys will need to figure out. As far as tanking goes, though, as I said, she does a debuff on you. 10%. It's basically a 10% mortal strike per stack. You need to rotate. On testing, it was usually every 2 stacks. Rotate every 2 stacks. There's also adds that join the fight per phase, guys. Per phase, she will summon 1 unique big add, and these adds need to be tanked. So for the majority of the fight, there will be something else to tank aside the boss if you're off tanking. So much like with Gorefiend or Kilrogg or whatever, 1 tank will be on the boss, 1 tank will be on the big add. When the tank on the boss gets their 2 or 3 stacks, they will taunt the big add, and the tank on the big add will taunt the boss, and you guys will just swap. The big adds themselves also melee pretty hard, understandably. The first one that is summoned in the first phase casts it's a about 1 or 2 second cast frontal where he just shoots 2 orbs in the direction he's facing. Obviously don't face them into the ranged unless you hate your ranged, which I do. I fucking hate ranged in Midwinter. No, I'm just kidding. So don't face them into your ranged. The second one doesn't do anything outside of melee fairly hard and attempt to heal the boss. Melee, whoever else, including yourself as the tank, can help interrupt that. And the third one puts a 90% DR shield on Velhari herself, so it needs to be killed ASAP, so that you can have access back to Velhari and kill her before she kills you, because of your increasing damage taken debuff ticking up. All of these adds hit fairly hard, as I said. Mechanically speaking, Tommy buddy, thank you so much. Oh shit, 14 months, man. Tommy man, thank you so much for your continued sub and support. 14 months, very much appreciated. So, as I said, guys, there's nothing crazy about this fight from a tanking perspective. The room itself is, first of all, quite small. There's not too many things you can do with cool mobility and stuff. There's not many places to go. You're often punished for mobility because it's very sensitive because of the aura in the first phase, for instance, Void Zone in the third phase, fonts and splashes in the second phase. So it's usually a fairly stationary boss. Again, not very difficult mechanically. Simple tank swap mechanic every 2 to 3 stacks with the big add, or just swap if there's no big add, but she fucking crushes. And much like Kormrok, which also was not a very hard fight mechanically for tanks, it will punish people that do not know how to properly smooth, mitigate, use your active mitigation, call for externals, blah, 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 blah. Or you could just get carried by your healers if it comes down to that after gearing. But you will get to points where, you know, you're going to have half your health pool, not be able to be healed past half your health pool, and she melees you for half your health pool kind of thing if you don't mitigate. So you'll literally get one shot at times. So you have to be very careful. Okay, so that's the fight there. For tanking, nothing, again, you should be worried about too much. Oh, sorry, nothing too exceptional you have to look out for tanking, but you have to worry about everything at all times on this fight. Let's go do Zul-Herak next. In the same tier as Velhari in terms of loot drops, like high level loot drops, right? So this fight is very wonky, very cool in my opinion. You either hate it or you love it. I've never met anyone in between yet, and if you say it, I won't believe you. And I have like a gut feeling this will be like the blast furnace of the tier. I don't know. It's such a weird fight. It's from the same guy that made Black Fuse, so if that's of any indication. Anyways, okay. So this fight, there is a boss. This boss will summon a big add at a certain percentage on the fire side of the room. If whoever's seen this boss room, it's essentially a big platform with, when you walk in, a green fell portal on the left and a shadow portal on the right. At a certain percent, he will summon a big add that looks like, what was that new dude's name? Balthazar? No, that wasn't it. The guy in Firelands. Anyway, he looks like that dude, the 5th boss in there. He summons a guy that looks like that. And then at a later percentage, he summons a big Voidwalker looking add. Once those adds die, he enters his next phase and you have to kill him. Alright, that's generally how this fight works out. However, carried by healers? Yeah, I wish. So what's going to happen at this point is the boss himself melees fairly hard, and he, based on his elemental status, he will switch between being green in his fire status and being purple in his void status. He will either Void Strike you or Fell Strike you, which hits quite hard. Used to be dodgeable. This is one of the mechanics I was talking about, GOE, and I was like, holy thing, this is fucking overpowered for Druids, and then they changed it. So we'll hit you for a very heavy amount of fire damage or shadow damage, depending on what state he's in, and you need to mitigate. It does have a cast bar. It's like a second and a half, something like that. You know it's about to hit you. It's on a pretty consistent timer usually, fairly predictable, but you do need something up for it because it will hit you quite hard. And if it hits you for full damage and something else happens in the room, an explosion somewhere in the room, you have dots on you, whatever it may be, it can like honestly kill you. So that's what you have to be careful with the boss. The adds themselves also hit fairly hard. Their melees are actually okay. However, both adds have some sort of every 15 to 20 second bursty mechanic on the tanks. Could be fairly scary. The Fell add, the Balrog, that's it, right? Yeah, Balrog, thank you. I just looked down too. The Balrog looking motherfucker will do, where is it? There it is. Fell Strike. No, not Fell Strikes. Fellblaze Fury, there we go. Fell Strike is what I was talking about from the boss. Fell Strike and Void Strike. Fellblaze Fury, this is what I'm talking about. So, it's exactly how it looks. It is basically, he will hit you 4 times, and each over the course of like 2.5, 3 seconds, and each successive hit, which happens quite quickly, will be an increased fire damage value of its predecessor. Okay, so he'll hit you for 150k, then 50% harder, then 50% harder, then 50% harder, and that's it. So it's a very quick, very bursty ramp-up damage effect. This is certainly a situation where DKs shine. AMS, Rune Tap, golden for DKs in this situation. However, because of the frequency that this ability is cast with, AMS, even Runed for the reduced cooldown, will not be up for every single one, but Rune Taps will. So, this is outside of this, though, the mob's pretty standard in terms of damage. He doesn't do anything else crazy to the tank himself. But again, there's so much other crap going on in this fight in terms of AoE explosions and dots and fire and like jizz all over the place that combinations of things will kill you, which is very common in Blast Furnace as well. So in Blast Furnace, you have a ton of adds in Phase 1, for instance, or in Phase 2 too. You have somewhat of a heavy but predictable damage intake, and then all of a sudden, the furnace itself, which is on a timer so you would know, but sometimes you miss it, sometimes you just can't do anything about it, then the furnace itself would pulse for a bunch of fire damage on top of all the damage you're intaking and just kill you, right? This fight has components like that to it as well, so you have to be very careful. The shadow ad that he summons is Omnis. Where is he? There he is. He has a similar mechanic to the Balrog motherfucker. Just a shadow version of it essentially. It's a bit different. It's heavier damage that pulses over a wider time and also debuffs you for future hits of that damage, Withering Gaze, but also future hits of the Fellblaze Fury, which is the debuff. What the fuck am I doing? Which is the debuff from Akhelion, the Balrog guy. So what has to happen here is that actually in very early iterations, the Shadow debuff would not drop from the tank, but the Fire one would. In most recent testings across various difficulties, they both just drop off the tank. The reason it increases your damage taken from both abilities is to prevent you from just YOLO tanking both adds, because if you have this debuff and then he hits you with this, you're just going to die, like straight up. So it's just to prevent that from happening, unless you're a bear. And then that's it. That's it for this fight. Nothing else to worry about from a tanking perspective. However, I will mention this fight is very... the tank damage is high in this fight. It's high in sustain. It's high in burst. Movement and positioning on this fight is very important. So you have to focus on a bunch of other shit while you're tanking, and all this lethal potential stuff could be happening. So you always have to keep an eye on timers and shit like that, as you always should. So that's the overview of like the basics of what's happening to you on this fight as a tank. Once you kill both adds, Zul-Herak goes crazy, and he like doesn't know if he has an innie or an outie anymore, and he constantly switches between fire and fel. What happens, one of the premise mechanics of this fight is anytime you are affected by one type of damage, you are debuffed with that damage type for 15 seconds, and you will have, and if you take the other damage type, you'll explode for a bunch of damage and have a debuff on you that makes any subsequent explosions like that do even more damage. So, just to give an example, if you take fire damage because Balrog hits you in the face, or because you stand in a puddle, or whatever it may be, you will be debuffed for 15 seconds. Within 15 seconds, if you take any source of shadow damage in this fight, this is what will... Where the fuck's the ability? What's going to happen is you're going to explode with... There it is. Shadowfell Annihilation. It's going to do 170k damage to people within 20 yards, and also debuff you to make you and anyone that it hit take 100% increased damage from the next time that happens. And it's like a 2-minute debuff. So basically, you can't let that happen. So, keeping that in mind, once he goes crazy in Phase 3 and you kill both adds, he'll be rapidly switching between Fel and Void, Shadow and Fire, and as a result of doing that, he still has his abilities for his Void Slash and his Fel Slash. So if only one tank is trying to big dick it and tank it, every time he slashes him with a different element, the tank will explode for what I just mentioned, and you will die eventually because you'll be not only chaining the melee around you, but you'll be taking more and more damage too. Oh yeah, good call, Castles. I'll do that right now. Sorry guys, 1 second. I just realized I should probably change my title. 6.2 tank. I mean, it's almost over anyway. Powwow for HFC. Okay. So obviously in this fight, you will assign one tank to be the Void tank, one tank to be the Fel tank. Make sure that you guys are not crossing streams. Happy days. Taunt when necessary. Once he hits the 4th phase, nothing new happens. He will just do an increasing pulse damage on the raid every, I think, 10 seconds, and nothing happens for you as a tank that's new. However, like the Blast Furnace example we gave, all this other crap is still happening. Big melee damage, slashes, whatever, and now there's also an AoE pulse associated, much like on Blast Furnace, that pulses in the background. So you have to be really careful, know when the timers are coming up every 10 seconds, and make sure you either topped or have some kind of CD if you are going to die with the pulse plus melee, all that kind of shit. All right. Aura of Contempt, I'm not seeing... oh, for Velhari. Okay, that's it for Zul-Herak, by the way. Every time I say that's it, it's a lot on Zul-Herak. It's a fun fight, and it's a tough fight.
Surprise, cockbags!
Velhari. Somebody's asking, I don't see anything about absorbs. You're looking at the wrong thing. You're looking at the aura. This is what limits healing to a certain maximum health on this fight. The tank debuff that you should be looking at on this fight is Seal of Decay, right here. Melee attacks occasionally curse the target with Shadow Magic, reducing healing and absorbs received by 10% for 18 seconds. This effect stacks. That is the tank debuff that you're looking for on Velhari, if that's what you guys were talking about. Barrowman. 4 months going strong, man. Very much appreciated. Bad Bobby. He changed your name to 2K16. Oh, funny. Yeah, Graf's going Pally, I'm going Warrior, guys. Alright, so 3 fights left. Let's talk real quick about Fel Lord for tanky perspective stuff. Dry throat or something, man. Okay. This guy will put his hand up your ass and use you as a hand puppet in certain parts of this fight. That is how hard he hits. Even if you're stacked properly, he will crush you. Be prepared. Prepare your anus. Blah, blah, blah. Unless he gets tuned down, which I assume he won't because he's just meant to do that. So, he himself melees very hard. Tank mechanic-y stuff that are relevant on this fight are as follows. Oh yeah, sorry guys, I was joking. No, I'm not playing warrior. I'm playing Baron next tier. Gref's playing warrior. So what's gonna happen on this fight, guys, is he's just meleeing you, hitting you very hard. The first ability that the first relative ability that you're gonna encounter as a tank on this fight is, where the fuck is it? Not latent. No. Where the hell is it? Fissure from crystals armed. Oh my god, where are you? There we go, Soul Cleave. Okay. So Soul Cleave is what he does on his primary target every whatever amount of time. Once you get Soul Cleaved as a tank, you are sent downstairs. When you are sent downstairs, you are in your own happy little realm, and you basically have to play Pac-Man and dodge some waves and some rings. You can't let anything touch you, and it is a 10-second phase. Once you are done this phase and you come up, you will explode 4 waves, or your latent energy will be released. For whoever doesn't know this fight, go read up on it. But either way, your latent energy will be released, which is stuff that some people should not be touched by, or the pillars on this fight should not be touched by. So it is very important on this fight, as a tank downstairs, to not only make sure you're positioning properly, but to also communicate to the people upstairs where you're positioning, so people are not near there if they should not be getting hit by those waves, or are near there if they should be getting hit those waves. Either way, you need to communicate where you're going on that downstairs phase, and make sure you're basically surviving for the 10 seconds you're downstairs and not getting hit by shit downstairs. Meanwhile, once you get sent down, of course, the other tank taunts off you, and then the process is repeated. Then they will get sent down, you're back up, all that kind of stuff. Also what happens is, once you are sent downstairs, you are debuffed with, Cloven Soul, as you can see. Increased shadow damage taken by 100%. There are sources of shadow damage in this fight, including downstairs, and it's a 90-second debuff. You will be sent downstairs again before this debuff expires, making it even more important that you don't get hit by shit downstairs, because there's no one to heal you except yourself, unless you're a warrior. And then you're going to die, right? So just be very careful. Once this phase is done, essentially it is a phase. Once this phase is done, he'll enter his unarmed phase. So this is his armed phase, or his disarmed phase. And what's going to happen is he's going to become heavy-handed. This is where tanks will get shit on and crushed and all that kind of stuff. Your typical tank split damage mechanic. The 2 tanks need to be stacked. If you're not, one tank will be eating the brunt of the damage. And even when the 2 tanks are stacked, he hits very, very, very hard. Okay? So this is just your typical but very important test of, can you smooth and mitigate damage properly during this phase. Get externals, use your personals, save your Big Daddy CDs here unless you needed them for an emergency earlier, overlap CDs for this phase 110%, anything to survive this phase, alright? Once you bounce around between those 2 phases, eventually you'll push him to the 3rd phase, where he basically will have a combination of the 2 phases, and during this final phase, and for the remainder of this final phase, he will also be heavy-handed, same idea. Heavily armed, he will be hitting, once again, very hard, this time for not such a short burst window phase, but rather the entirety of the final phase. So, yeah, you're just going to be getting crushed, and you need to use your abilities properly here. Not much more to say to it. You should be, if you're front loading for whatever reason and using a lot of your shit like personals and externals between these heavily and heavy-handed phases, like the safer phases in phase 1, you're going to be in a lot of trouble during these phases because you're going to die, or you're going to tax the fuck out of your healers who need to be healing the raid at that time too, and other people will die. So make sure you're properly pooling resources and CDs for these phases. Okay, last 2 fights, guys. Mannoroth. After Mannoroth, I'm just going to go bio and, like, I don't know, like, drink some water or something. It's not helping. After Mannoroth, we'll take, like, a 2-minute breather, and then we'll get back to Archimonde. And then if I think of anything else while taking a piss to mention, we will. But it's almost pretty much going to be the end of it, and then we'll open it up some Q&A. There's a lot of Midwinter people in here, too. So if people have questions and shit, I will be happy to answer what I can after. And we'll take it from there. Hon. Alrighty. Mannoroth. Mannoroth in his first iteration really was kind of boring for a tank. He didn't really damage very much. He had a predictable spike damage hit every like 20 or 30 seconds, and that kind of stuff. In later testings, he started to hit really hard. Just in general, his melee was a fair chunk of damage. And on top of all the other crap that's going on, like most of the fights this tier that have ads and all AoE shit shooting everywhere, there's lots of dangerous stuff that can combo you when he's comboing you or when he's meleeing you that could almost kill you or maybe kill you or get you in a dangerous situation that would force cooldowns that shouldn't be forced, that kind of stuff. So anyways, that's just a general note about the fight. Be on the lookout for that. This fight, however, in terms of positioning, is predominantly quite stationary, except for maybe later, depending on your strat and stuff. But most of the time, you're not really running around that much. You're just face tanking the boss, moving a bit from here to there, dodge this to help with this to whatever. The main thing that you have to watch out for on this fight is from Mannoroth himself. we'll get in the ads in a second. For Mannoroth himself, the main thing you have to watch on this fight is the glaive combo right here. As I said, every like 30 seconds or so, he basically does a combo. That is 3 hits, always in the same pattern. It used to be random, now they've changed it to always be consistent. So it will be a glaive thrust, which is this one here, which is similar to the Kilrogg mechanic. If you do not have, it punishes you for not having your active mitigation up, as it applies a fairly heavy bleed to you, right? 60k every 1 second, bleeds pierce armor, so and now pierce stagger as well. So make sure you have it up, and then so he'll start with this for the combo. Then he will do a massive blast that will fucking throw you 3/4 of the way across his platform and hits you for a very large amount of shadow damage. As you can see, 500k shadow damage. So it'll punt you, it'll make you take a huge amount of increased shadow damage, and it will debuff you for 45 seconds, so that if you do take another massive blast again, it'll hit you 300% harder. So like 2 million damage kind of thing. The lol bears. So that's obviously the forced tank swap. Forced tank swap for 2 reasons. Oh, and then he glaive combos again after. So it goes glaive combo, massive blast, glaive combo again. He will finish his cast on the active target. So if you are taunting halfway, if tank number 2 is taunting halfway through a massive blast cast, he will actually eat the massive blast, not the person who is cast on. Unlike, for instance, Smash on Blackhand. Once Smash has started casting on its primary target, you can taunt him, and Smash will still finish on the target, on the first target. So you have to be careful because you have a forced taunt swap mechanic for 2 reasons. One is you take a lot of damage and you shouldn't be tanking it for the next massive blast. 2 is that it is not an aggro drop. So when he does his massive blast and punts you 3/4 of the way across the platform, he will chase after you into the middle of the room, and positioning is pretty important on this fight, so you don't want the boss running around like a fucking idiot, especially because the room is huge, he has a massive hitbox, he's a pain in the ass to position where you want to position him. So it is a very important timing where he will glaive combo, have your active mitigation up, massive blast, still tank number 1, the tank gets hit and starts flying, and then he will start casting his second glaive combo. At this point, the second tank needs to taunt and have their active mitigation up, otherwise they will get hit by the puncture wound. Alright? So that's the main worry that you have to deal with as a tank in most of the phases on this fight. Just make sure you are taunting at the right time. Don't taunt too early, don't taunt too late. And that's really it from a tank-only perspective for the predominant part of this fight, outside of, just dodging like Fellseeker and moving out of infernal AoE pulsing and all that kind of shit. Later in the fight, much like whoever did SOO on Garrosh, he has similar thing where in his final phase, all of his abilities become empowered. For some abilities, this actually does stuff. For some, like for some, it doesn't do anything. So with respect to the one that we're worrying about, which is the glaive and massive blast combo, what's going to happen here is that step 1 and 3 of the combo, the thrust, the one that will apply a bleed if you do not have your active mitigation up, those stay the same. However, empowered blast changes a bit in this phase. What happens is he will hit you with his usual massive blast and punt you. When he hits you, though, he also causes 3 like shadow waves to go out from him in 45-degree angles relative to his primary direction. So, for instance, if this is Mannoroth, right, like right here, he's like a potato, all right, and he is tanking in this direction, like he's facing in this direction for the tank, what's going to happen is the massive blast is going to hit you, it's going to punt you all the way through the arrow, and then 3 waves are going to spawn. 1 wave is going to travel in his primary direction, 1 wave is going to travel 45 degrees to the left, and the other wave is going to travel 45 degrees to the right, right? And those waves are also classified as massive blasts. So, if you get hit by a wave, if you get massive blasted, you get debuffed while you're flying through the air. If you get hit by one of these waves running back in or whatever, it also counts as a massive blast. So it will also punt you, and it will also do its now 280k shadow damage times 300% on you, okay? This, similar to Kormrok's thing, is meant to punish you for classes that are planning to just charge back in immediately. You have to choose your angle properly, because if you get punted and charge back in right away, well, that first frontal wave is still going to be traveling. You're going to charge right into that wave, and you're going to die. All right. So you have to make sure you're angled properly if you do plan to charge back in. Obviously, monks can just transcendence in a predetermined position where it would be safe, presumably, assuming the boss doesn't move, and that kind of stuff. But you have to be careful. You have to pick the angle at which you travel back in. Otherwise, you're going to die if you just try to YOLO charge back in. I'm also not 100%... Actually, never mind. Yeah. So, that's what you have to... that's what the Empowered Massive Blast does. Yeah, me too, Heaton, buddy. Hey, was that you last night? Oh, no. Oh no, I empowered blasted the fuck out of your butt. Okay, the other tank relevant stuff that you have to worry about on this fight is relative to the Doom Lords that spawn in the first phase and in Mythic other phases too. These need to be tanked. They don't, at least in their time, didn't hit particularly hard as a melee, with their melee. However, every time they melee attack, they will stack this on you. It's called Doom Spike. What happens is the stacks themselves don't actually do more damage, but once the debuff expires, you will take a shadow damage hit relative to the amount of stacks you have at the end of the debuff. So, the longer you tank it, the more stacks you get. The more stacks you get, the bigger the spike damage will be when it hits you when you stop taunting. So, this is what forces you to have your tank swap here, so you keep stacks under control. You explode for a very reasonable amount of damage, no problem. Things you can do to like cheese this, I'm sure you guys can think of too. Most shit works on it, but with the frequency that these apply, and on higher difficulties, aka Mythic, the frequency with which these adds occur, you don't always have those options available. All right. Do the massive blast waves disappear? Yeah, they just go like right off the platform. Once they've gone out, they've gone out. Once you avoid them and move back in, they're not coming back. They're gonna like U-turn and go right up your ass. I'm going with what's best for our progression, which will be a druid next tier, Frankie. As much as I love paladin, we had a very tough decision. We're gonna go druid for sure. We had a very tough decision to make between warrior and paladin, which took, like, as many of you know, like 3-4 weeks, and we finally recently made the decision that it'll be warrior druid this tier. And even at this point, it's been very much a coin flip. So, yeah. You just talked about the empowered massive blast. I presume he still... Yes, he does the same combo while it's empowered. It's just that the massive blast portion of the combo has the waves associated with it as well. That's all. But the 2 glaive combos that make you cause you to get a bleed if you don't have active mitigation up will still be first. So it'll be that then the Massive Blast, then the Glaive combo again, okay? We'll be streaming HFC raids, not Mythic, and we'll be streaming about half-ish. We haven't decided exactly which bosses if our Heroic clears. Okay, guys, I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to go bio, whatever, grab a drink, then we'll talk about Archimonde real quick. Then if there's anything anybody wanted to know particularly, I can try go over it from a HFC tanking standpoint as much as we can, or as much as I'm able to answer things. And then at that point, we'll just have some Q&A. So if you have any questions, just hold on to them about any of the bosses we talked about, and we'll answer what we can, hopefully some of them. If your question is like, hey, what is your strategy on this boss, in brackets tanking, I cannot tell you that. So, Burb. If Pally would have been one of your 2 tanks, would you be the Paladin? Yeah, then Graf would have played as Bear, correct. Okay, be right back, guys. See you in 20 minutes. Yeah, bio. Fap. Who am I kidding, guys? That would take like fucking 12 seconds if I find the tweezers. Alright, sorry about that, guys. I just realized cats apparently need food as well, so apparently feeding your pet is good. Are those noises sloot faps? I was fapping with a metal butter knife, yes. You know how I like it. Dirty girl. Alright. Okay. Just gonna eat this slice real quick. How you guys doing? Cruzado, it's out in... I don't know. Servers apparently are up at 2 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, so it's 8 o'clock here now. 18 hours, I guess? Yeah. What's up, Nesqui? Ça va? I think Brewmaster 4-piece relative to the other tanks is probably the strongest of them all. Full screen not eating. Can I please rate the 5 tanks? If you're doing like week 1 mythic progression, like cutting edge shit, I would say Guardian and then Warrior/Paladin and then DK/Monk. But again, discrepancies really small between them all. And as you start to accumulate some gear, set bonuses, stuff like that, there's really not a big difference between any of them. True, Dars, true. Is that white pizza? Yeah, why it gotta be white, Decima? I use a Siberia V2 from Steel Series Gremlin. I'm pretty high with pain, yeah. I'm doing well, Nesqui, man. Nice, man. There's some gold for you, Rita. Alright. When are we streaming our first heroic? 7 p.m. Eastern. My stream will be up at around 1 o'clock tomorrow. Servers should hopefully come up around 2. And then I'll be doing some 6.2 stuff, you know, getting my shipyard and all that crap on as many tunes as I can, getting ready for the Tomes of Chaos part, and then we'll start the first raid at 7 p.m. Eastern. Black. No. It had sauce on it, Des, but that was just the crust one. I'm going to be playing Druid for HFC progression. Oh, that's some good shit. Alright, guys, let's talk about Archimonde. Finish this up. You guys can expect this fight to be very long. Margok style, multiple phase, multiple half phases or phase transitions. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a mythic only phase. I believe the guy who did this fight is the same guy who did Margok, for what it's worth, so just keep that in mind. As a result, there will be many different mechanics that the raid needs to deal with, and you need to deal with as a tank, and you need to deal with because you're part of the raid, and there's raid mechanics and all that kind of crap, right? Okay, so he has, in Heroic, basically 3 main phases, guys, with kind of transitions. He has like half phases that are still part of the main phase kind of thing. It's weird. Guys, by the way, if you have any questions, just hold on to them. We'll do a big Q&A after this, alright? Just make note of them, whatever they were. If it was the initial stuff with the tier bonuses and trinkets or some of the boss stuff we talked about, just hold on to them and we'll go. Alright, so I'm not going to go over all the mechanics in this fight because it's a very long fight. I'm going to go over, as we did with the other bosses, all the tank relevant mechanics that you need to worry about, such as the Death Brand, which is probably the most predominant in the earlier phases, which does exactly what it says it does. It hits you for a massive blast style amount of shadow damage. It doesn't punt you though. And what happens is it summons a Death Caller once that happens. In the one PTR test that existed, what happened is once the Death Caller started on his primary target, that dot was only applied to that target regardless if the other tank taunted. Whether that was a bug, whether that's even useful for live, whether other people saw different things, who knows. Maybe it's not a big deal. Just something to note. My mouse just died. Oh, there we go. Oh, good. I'm so excited for my mouse to die right before 6.2 hits. So what needs to happen is, obviously, the longer this Deathcaller lives, the more damage it will do to not only the tank, but it also does an AoE Shadow Volley right here, Shadow Blast, and makes people take increased shadow damage. And 30 seconds in a fight like this is actually a fairly long duration, especially considering there's other sources of shadow damage later in the fight too. So this basically needs to just be killed right away. And
Surprise, cockbags!
the tank that's on this, Trebix Man, thank you so much for subbing and supporting the stream. Welcome to the Bagel Brotherhood. Let me fist that by man. I hope your stay here is lengthy, fun, and full of carbs. Guys, please, while I'm blabbing on, let's give him a warm, saluty welcome. Would be very much appreciated. He's playing his warrior cuss. Anyways, so what's going to happen, much like various other parts in this in this dungeon, or tanking in general, one tank will be on Archimonde, one tank will be on the Deathcaller. Deathcaller needs to die prior to the next Deathcaller spawning, otherwise you're going to have two Deathcallers, and one tank will have a Deathcaller and Archimonde, and one guy will have a Deathcaller still left over. So so you have to be careful with that. Now, there are mechanics in this fight that allow you to negate or ignore shadow damage, namely the little orbs that Irel spawns. However, you guys need to make a decision or consideration based on your raid and strategy and whatever it may be, who these orbs go out to, because they are limited, right? So do we want some of the healers getting them to make sure they don't get gibbed? Do we want the tank getting them because the tank's suffering heavy magic damage while these Deathcallers are alive? The choice is up to you, but keep in mind that if you do decide that the tank is one of the people that should be getting one of these buffs, you will have to move to these buffs, and there will be a lot of fire in the area, so positioning on this fight will be very important, as will tank kiting and, well, not kiting, but tank movement, and of course tank positioning, as with any fight, is of the utmost importance on this fight, just because of fire spawns and whatnot. That's really all you have to worry about as far as the first phase is concerned. You want to be always moving the boss in such a way that you're maximizing cleave. There's a new NVIDIA driver. I'm like scared because of the black screening things. You always want to maximize cleave. You don't want the boss's ass in fire, which there will be a lot of. You want to be nearby for orbs, or be able to get to orbs quickly yourself as a tank if you need to. There's nothing in this phase that requires any heavy mobility, and the keyword is requires. However, there is always advantage to having mobility. For instance, in this phase, if you need to go get an orb, but now you have moved the boss 20 to 30 yards because of fire reasons, you need to go get the orb while the other tank taunts off of you, and it would be easier to leap and charge back in, or sprint out and charge back in, or roll and transcend back in, than it would to stubbly legged DK run over there, or like momentary pally sprint out there. Again, not necessary. Every bit helps though, right? So that's it for this phase, and technically half phase. Once you transition, which is I believe 70%, yep, 70%, what's going to happen is you're going to enter a new set of abilities in the fight, and in this particular phase, there wasn't anything, honestly, that was really scary as a tank. The ad that spawns the Doomcaller, the Deathcaller, no longer spawns in this phase on Heroic. Who the fuck knows on Mythic, right? No one's ever seen
Surprise, cockbag!
No one's ever seen Mythic except the internal testing team. This fight will test tank's abilities to Elliot Man. Thank you so much for your continued support. 6 months and going, man. Very much appreciated. This phase can test tank's ability to quickly and efficiently move the boss into a new position in order to minimize certain effects that happen in or to the raid, or to control certain effects that should be happening to the raid. During this phase as well, we're going to get a, during the second half of this phase, so like the 2.5 phase, I guess, there's going to be ads that continually spawn from his portal area, the big swirly portal area near the Death Gate, or the Death Gate, you know what I'm talking about. Ads will constantly spawn here. There will be, at least on Heroic, there were sets of 3 Dreadstalkers, the little dog dudes that had no target. You could taunt them, but they still fixated, so it doesn't matter. They weren't actually going to come to you. And there is a larger ad that spawns, this Fellborn Overfiend. And what happens with these is they don't debuff the tank in any way. They hit fairly decently, nothing crazy though, but again, it was quite undertuned. So one tank will grab this, while the off tank will grab this ad, while the main tank will be on Archimonde. There's no forced tank swap in this phase. This ad doesn't do anything to the tank outside melee. However, every time you reduce its health 25%, so 75, 50, 25, and when it dies, it will pulse explosive damage on the raid. So you need to time when this ad is killed, or if you don't, or either time it or know that healers are prepared for the pulse that's going to imminently hit the raid when it does explode. Okay. Nothing else. Oh wait, did they not change? Oh wait, Deathbrand still happens in this phase. I'm an idiot. I thought they took it out. What am I thinking about? Okay, sorry. I guess the Death Caller still happens in this phase. Why did I remember they took it out? JK. Anyways, okay, the Death Caller from phase 1 still happens in this phase. So there is still a forced tank swap mechanic with the Death Caller. Whoever has the Death Caller should not be tanking the boss. And if I were to suggest anything, I would actually say it depends how it's tuned, but this ad was... Where is it? This ad, the Overfiend, was fairly insignificant on Heroic. So I would actually suggest that whoever's tanking Archimonde probably tank the Overfiend, and the Death Caller is handled alone by one tank just because of the immense amount of magic damage that's pulsing on the target as well. However, who knows what it's going to be scaled like. They might make Archimonde hit like fucking Blackhand, where he chunks a tank's health in half with every swing, in which case you don't want anyone tanking anything but Archimonde when they're tanking Archimonde. So you have to be careful with that. So sorry, I thought they took this out. I don't know why. Bad information. Anyways, so phase 1 and 2 both have the Hell Caller that spawns. It was phase 3 that they took it out. I'm just going insane. I swear to God they took it out on these phases. In a second here, guys. Chaos, Shackle. Yeah, I don't think it's in phase 3. Anyways, I don't think it's in phase 3, that ad. You can read the DJ yourself too. The DJ. But I'm pretty sure that the Hell Caller is not in phase 3. Anyways, once phase 3 starts, once again we're introduced with new abilities, although he maintains some abilities. As I said, I'm pretty sure that that ad no longer spawns in phase 3. They could have changed it. They may still yet change it. Maybe I just don't remember properly because I'm 40 years old. I'm not actually, for whoever's into the stream. I'm 12. So any raid mechanics that you have to deal with in this phase, or that have been left over from other phases, you'll still have to deal with. You also have to drag the boss occasionally, probably for fire. In this phase, the main things you have to worry about now as a tank is that there are essentially portals that spawn to the Twisting Nether. Okay, hence the Twisting Nether phase 3. So what's going to happen is he is going to target the tank. He's going to debuff you, and after, I think it was 8 seconds. Yep. After 8 seconds, you and anyone within 8 yards of you is going to get chucked to the Twisting Nether. On the Twisting Nether, what you can expect is nothingness and a random rock platform with what at the time was a Nikki Smalls, with what at the time was a Void Walker, and you just need to kill the Void Walker in order to leave the phase. That's what happens. It does need to be tanked. It does have an active target, so as you can see the Nether here, and it has a handful of abilities that essentially will either need to be interrupted, will cut down on your real estate on the platform rapidly, will punt people around, so mobility in this phase, although it's kind of not that useful mobility because the entire group will get punted, mobility in this phase as a tank certainly can help because you have better control over when and if you get punted by the Nether Walkers, the Void Callers that I was talking about. This phase is all about area management, like real estate, ground management, dealing with punt angles, and making sure you're interrupting. Otherwise, the ad itself, again, didn't really hit that hard, but it was probably very undertuned, right? Back upstairs, once you get sent downstairs, of course, the off-tank will taunt off of you. Keep moving Archimonde as necessary, and the rest of the fight really, at least on... What the fuck are you doing? The rest of the fight, at least on Heroic, was really not much else to say from a tanking perspective. One tank goes down, deals with the ad, the other tank stays up, moves the boss accordingly, and that's really about it. Of course, we don't know what's going on Mythic. We don't know if there's a Mythic-only phase. We don't know exactly how each thing will go down on Mythic, each ability, if it'll change at all. You know, Blackhand didn't really have much documentation for the fact that slag bombs that hit the fire in phase 1 now explode for the whole raid. So you could have a bunch of these hidden kind of gems that all of a sudden also wildly affect tanking somehow. We just don't know. But from the test we did and based on the dungeon journal, that's really it for tanking. Again, if you analyze everything, the entire instance, you can now see what I was saying earlier, that this is certainly not an instance that very heavily benefits from high mobility tanks, which is good news for things like DKs and Paladins. However, there will always be some small situations where having mobility just helps. Being able to instantly get somewhere, or almost instantly get somewhere, rather than take a couple of extra seconds to do it, will help. And there are some fights where it will just straight up be much better to have it. Obviously Iron Reaver and Mannoroth will help too, just because of his punt. You could charge back in, and perhaps Kormrok, depending on how you guys deal with the SWAT mechanic from him. Alright, so that's kind of it behind the instance. There's a very generally for the instance, there's very dispersed damage type of intake as well. There's not BRF was very, very heavily focused on a lot of physical damage, whether it be sustained or spike physical damage. There were obviously some fights where it was magic, like the dogs on Flamebender, but for the predominant part, it was just constant, heavy, physical, crushing your face things. Kormrok, Blackhand fucking crushed you, or Gorger's Acid Torrents. Gruul's slice, the scariest part of the slice was the physical hit. You know, the list goes on. In this raid, there is the usual physical throughput from bosses that is just painful, period, and some tanks are better at than others, but there are certainly more instances in this raid where there's different, not only types, but how they're dealt to you of damage from different bosses. There's sustained magic, such as the dot on Archimonde from the Hellcallers. There's spike damage, such as spike magic damage, such as the ads on Zul-Herak. There's spike physical, and then there's obviously the usual sustained physical from what's it called, from the hard hitting bosses, especially things like from what we saw Velhari and Fellord. So there's kind of everything, which brings all the tanks kind of closer together, and also this is where you need to analyze things like stat priority at a different level, at a deeper level than just what did this sim show me. That usually sims a 1.5 second robot hitting me every 1.5 seconds for melee with a minor magic dot on me. A lot of sims are usually like that. But you need to go deeper and analyze really what is most advantageous for this tier. I'll give you an extreme example in a second. Bosun Man, $5. Thank you, dude. What are the top healers for 6.2? We've been seeing Disc Priests, or just Disc Priests. We've been seeing Holy Paladins still be very strong. We've been seeing Resto Shaman do quite well. None of the healers were like shit, like I would never use this healer, but those three stuck out as fairly strong healers from what I've seen. I'm not a healing expert, this is just what I see in here in Midwinter and stuff like that and around the community, but that's just what we've seen. Disc Priests and Paladins, after that, you choose. So basically, to give an extreme example of stat priorities versus what you see in Sims, for somebody that fails to actually analyze how effective they would be in an actual raiding environment, if you had a boss like, okay, let's take, let's just take an extreme example. If you have a boss that hits you for nothing but magic damage very heavily, all of a sudden mastery for a druid is really not as good anymore, even though that Sims usually showed as the best, for TDR and TMI and all that kind of stuff. Once you analyze what the actual type of damage is in the fight, you're really not proccing Primal Tenacity. The attack power gain from Mastery is really good for FR and whatnot, but at the end of the day, you're not getting what you need from it. So you always need to analyze things a bit deeper, and because of the wide variety of damage that exists on a per boss basis in this instance, it will. I wouldn't say it will like wildly sway. Cat, what the fuck are you doing? I wouldn't say it would like wildly sway stat priorities, and you would like regem and re-enchant on a per fight basis. But there are certainly some fights where you're like, yeah, you know, this mastery is not so good anymore, and things like that. So always take a closer look. I don't think there's much else to say, guys. I think we kind of covered everything I wanted to cover. What time is it? It's 8 o'clock, so we have about